Ethan Cole stared at the contract on Victoria Hale's mahogany desk, his hands trembling. "You want me to what?" "Marry me," she said, her ice blue eyes unwavering. 1 year, no questions asked. He laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She slid the paper forward. "Sign this, and your debts disappear. Your daughter gets private school, health insurance, everything you can't give her now." Ethan's throat tightened. Behind him, the city glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, a world he'd never belonged to. "And what do you get?" Victoria's expression didn't change. "Everything I've ever worked for." What happens when a struggling single father becomes the fake husband of the most powerful woman in Manhattan? Stay until the end to find out how a contract built on lies became something neither of them expected. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Ethan Cole hadn't planned on staying late. He never did anymore. Not since Sarah died. Not since every minute away from Emma felt like another failure stacking onto an already crushing pile. But the Henderson account needed reconciliation before morning, and if he didn't finish it, someone else would. Someone who didn't need the job as desperately as he did. The 43rd floor of Hale Industries was a ghost town after 8 p.m. The cubicles that buzzed with controlled chaos during business hours now sat dark and silent, lit only by the ambient glow of the Manhattan skyline bleeding through massive windows. Ethan's fingers flew across his keyboard, his eyes burning from too many hours staring at spreadsheets that all blurred together into meaningless numbers. He didn't hear her approach. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan jerked upright, his coffee, cold for the past 2 hours, sloshing dangerously close to his keyboard. Victoria Hale stood 3 feet from his cubicle, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back with surgical precision, and those ice-blue eyes that had stared down hostile takeover attempts and billion-dollar negotiations now focused entirely on him. "Ms. Hale." He stood quickly, nearly knocking his chair backward. "I didn't realize anyone else was still here." "I could say the same." Her gaze swept across his desk, the cold coffee, the half-eaten sandwich from lunch, the framed photo of Emma grinning gap-toothed at the camera. "The Henderson account?" "Yes, ma'am. It'll be ready for the morning meeting." She nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both approval and dismissal. But she didn't leave. Instead, she did something Ethan had never seen Victoria Hale do in the 3 years he'd worked here. She hesitated. "Do you have family waiting for you, Mr. Cole?" The question caught him off guard. "My daughter. She's with the neighbor until I get home." "How old?" "6. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those carefully controlled eyes. "Then don't let me keep you." She walked away before he could respond, her heels clicking against marble with the same measured precision she brought to everything else. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the interaction. In 3 years at Hale Industries, Victoria had spoken directly to him exactly 4 times. 3 of them were about project deadlines, and one was to tell him his tie was crooked during a client presentation. This made 5. He pushed the strangeness aside and finished the Henderson account, emailed it to the appropriate department heads, and packed up his things. The subway ride home was the usual crush of exhausted humanity, everyone avoiding eye contact, everyone pretending they weren't packed together like sardines hurtling through underground tunnels. Mrs. Chen answered her door before Ethan could knock, Emma already in her pajamas and half asleep against the older woman's hip. "Long day?" Mrs. Chen asked, the question heavy with understanding. She'd been watching Emma since Sarah's funeral, never once complaining about the late nights or the fact that Ethan paid her in cash because his bank account couldn't handle checks that might bounce. "They're all long days." Ethan lifted Emma carefully, feeling the familiar weight of her settle against his chest. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out. You always do." Mrs. Chen pressed a container of leftover soup into his free hand. "Make sure she eats breakfast tomorrow. Growing girls need more than cereal." Ethan's apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. The radiator clanked like it was trying to communicate in Morse code, the refrigerator hummed off key, and the neighbors upstairs seemed to conduct their relationship entirely through screaming matches that rattled the ceiling. But it was home. or at least it was shelter. He tucked Emma into her bed, the one piece of furniture he'd spent money on, a princess frame she'd begged for at a yard sale. She stirred slightly as he pulled the covers up. "Daddy." "I'm here, baby girl." "Is Mommy watching us from heaven?" Ethan's chest constricted. Emma asked this question at least once a week, always when she was half asleep, always in that small voice that broke something inside him. "Yes, sweetheart. She's watching, and she's so proud of you." "Does she know you're sad?" He smoothed Emma's hair back from her forehead, the same gesture Sarah used to make. "I'm not sad when I'm with you." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that fathers tell because the truth, that he was drowning, that the grief sometimes felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest, that he lay awake at night doing math that never quite added up, wasn't something a 6-year-old should carry. Emma drifted back to sleep, and Ethan sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, listening to her breathe. Then he forced himself up, forced himself to eat Mrs. Chen's soup standing over the sink, forced himself to review Emma's homework, and signed the permission slip for the field trip he couldn't afford to chaperone because he'd already used all his personal days when she'd had the flu. The bills were waiting on the kitchen table like they always were. Student loans, medical debt from Sarah's final months, credit cards he'd maxed out trying to keep them afloat. The numbers swam in front of his eyes, and for just a moment, Ethan let himself imagine what it would be like to not be constantly calculating, constantly rationing, constantly one emergency away from complete collapse. Then he pushed the bills aside and went to bed. Victoria Hale didn't sleep much anymore. She'd trained herself out of the habit years ago, back when sleep felt like weakness, and every hour spent unconscious was an hour her competitors could use against her. Tonight, she stood in her penthouse overlooking Central Park, a glass of scotch in her hand that she wouldn't drink, watching the city pulse with late-night energy. The conversation with her lawyers earlier had gone exactly as she'd expected. The will was ironclad. Her father, even in death, had found a way to control her. "The inheritance and your position as CEO are contingent upon marriage before your 35th birthday," Gerald Patterson had explained, his expression sympathetic in that carefully practiced way of expensive attorneys. "If you're unmarried on that date, controlling interest in Hale Industries passes to your brother." Victoria had listened without reaction, the way she'd learned to listen to bad news, absorb it, process it, plan around it. "How long do I have?" 6 months. "And the marriage itself? Any specifications?" Gerald had hesitated then, shuffling papers he didn't need to reference. "It must be legally binding and maintained for a minimum of 1 year. After that, the inheritance is secure regardless of marital status." "So divorce after 12 months doesn't trigger the clause?" "Correct." Victoria had thanked him, paid his outrageous fee, and returned to her penthouse to consider her options. She could marry someone from her social circle, someone appropriate, someone who understood that this was a transaction rather than a romance. But those men came with their own ambitions, their own agendas. They'd want something beyond the financial arrangement, and Victoria had learned long ago that owing people anything beyond money was dangerous. She needed someone clean, someone controllable, someone desperate enough to take the deal and smart enough to follow the rules. Someone like Ethan Cole. She'd noticed him 3 years ago during a presentation on operational efficiency. While senior managers postured and performed, Ethan had been in the back of the room, quietly providing actual data and solutions. No theatrics, no self-promotion, just competence. Victoria had made a note of his name. Since then, she'd observed him from a distance, the way she observed everyone who showed potential. She knew about his wife's death from cancer. She knew about his daughter, about the debt he was drowning in, about the fact that he stayed late not because he was ambitious, but because he was terrified of losing the one stable thing in his daughter's life. She knew he was exactly what she needed. The question was whether he was desperate enough to accept. 3 days after their brief hallway encounter, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Ms. Hale requests your presence in her office at 7 p.m. Come alone." He stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Victoria Hale's executive assistant didn't send cryptic after-hours meeting requests to mid-level analysts. That wasn't how the corporate hierarchy worked. Ethan showed the message to David Park, his cubicle neighbor, and the closest thing he had to a friend at Hale Industries. David's eyes widened. Dude, you're either getting promoted or fired. At 7 p.m.? Rich people are weird. David shrugged. Maybe she wants to fire you personally. Show she cares about the little people? That's not comforting. You want comfort? Go to therapy. You want speculation? You came to the right place. Ethan spent the rest of the day in a state of low-level panic, running through every project he'd worked on, every interaction he'd had, trying to figure out what he could have possibly done to warrant personal attention from the CEO. By the time 7 p.m. arrived, his shirt was damp with nervous sweat and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The executive floor was even quieter than his own had been that night. Victoria's office occupied the corner with the best view, protected by her assistant's empty desk and double doors that looked like they weighed more than his car. He knocked. Come in. Victoria sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip, the city sprawling behind her like a kingdom she ruled. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Ethan sat. I'm going to make you an offer, Mr. Cole, and I need you to listen completely before you respond. Can you do that? His mouth had gone dry. Yes, ma'am. I need a husband. Not a real one, a legal one. For 1 year, you would live in my penthouse, attend social functions as my spouse, and maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. In exchange, I will pay off all your debts, provide a substantial salary, and establish a trust fund for your daughter's education and medical expenses. The words hit Ethan like physical blows. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You want me to what? Marry me, she said, her ice blue eyes unwavering. 1 year, no questions asked. He laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You're serious. Dead serious. She slid a folder across the desk. Sign this, and your debts disappear. Your daughter gets private school, health insurance, everything you can't give her now. Ethan's throat tightened. Behind her, the city glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, a world he'd never belonged to. And what do you get? Everything I've ever worked for. She let him read the contract. 27 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple transaction, his public compliance in exchange for financial security. The numbers made his head spin. The debt payoff alone was more money than he'd make in 5 years. The trust fund for Emma was enough to send her to any college in the country. Why me? He finally asked. Because you're competent, you're discreet, and you have something to lose if this goes wrong. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity she probably used during hostile negotiations. You're also not connected to my social circle, which means you have no secondary agenda. You need money. I need a husband. It's a clean transaction. There's nothing clean about this. No, she agreed. But it's honest. I'm not pretending this is romance or that we'll develop feelings for each other. This is a business arrangement with clear parameters and a defined endpoint. We both get what we need, and in 12 months we walk away. Ethan looked at the contract again, at the numbers that could transform Emma's entire life. He thought about the bills on his kitchen table, about Mrs. Chen's patient kindness that he couldn't properly repay, about the way Emma's shoes were getting too small and he'd been hoping they'd last another month. I need time to think about this. You have until Friday. After that, I'll find someone else. He stood on shaking legs, the folder heavy in his hands. Can I ask one more question? Yes. Why do you need to be married? For the first time, something almost like emotion flickered across Victoria's face. Because my father believed that women couldn't run companies alone, that we needed men to stabilize us, guide us, complete us. Her voice was flat, but he could hear the fury underneath. So he wrote a will that forces me to prove him right or lose everything I've built. That's archaic? Sexist? Legally binding? Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut. All of the above, but I won't let a dead man's prejudice destroy what I've worked for. So I'm playing by his rules long enough to make them irrelevant. Ethan left her office feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. He rode the subway home in a daze, picked up Emma from Mrs. Chen's, went through the evening routine on autopilot. After Emma fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the contract and a calculator, running the numbers over and over. The math was simple. The decision wasn't. He called the only person whose judgment he trusted. Sarah, he said to the empty kitchen, to the ghost of his wife who'd been gone for 2 years but still felt present in every corner of this apartment. Tell me I'm crazy. Tell me I can't do this. But Sarah had always been practical. She'd been the one who insisted they make a will when Emma was born, who'd set up the life insurance policy they could barely afford, who'd held his hand during her final days and made him promise he'd give Emma everything. Everything, she'd whispered, whatever it takes. This was whatever it takes. Ethan picked up his phone and typed a message to the number Victoria had called from. I have questions. Her response came within seconds. Tomorrow. Same time. Bring your daughter. Emma was on her best behavior in the elevator ride up to the executive floor, her small hand gripping Ethan's tightly as she stared at her reflection in the polished brass. She wore her good dress, the one they saved for special occasions, and she'd insisted on wearing her princess crown, a plastic tiara from a birthday party 2 years ago. Is your boss a princess too? Emma asked. Something like that. Victoria's assistant, a severe woman named Margaret who looked like she'd been carved from ice, led them into the office. Victoria stood as they entered, and Ethan watched her assess Emma with the same calculating precision she probably used for quarterly reports. Emma, this is Ms. Hale. You're pretty, Emma announced with the brutal honesty of 6-year-olds. Thank you. Victoria's expression didn't soften exactly, but something shifted. She crouched down to Emma's level, a gesture Ethan hadn't expected. I like your crown. I'm a princess. Daddy says Mommy's watching from heaven, and she's proud of me. Ethan's stomach dropped. Emma, It's fine. Victoria met his eyes briefly before returning her attention to Emma. I'm sure she is very proud. You're clearly a remarkable young lady. Margaret appeared with what was either impeccable timing or careful planning, offering to show Emma the view from the terrace. Emma looked to Ethan for permission, and he nodded, watching his daughter skip away with a stranger in a building that represented everything he'd never be able to give her on his own. You wanted her to see this, Ethan said when they were alone. I wanted to understand what I'm asking you to disrupt. Victoria moved to the bar cart near her desk, pouring 2 glasses of water. You're a single father. Any arrangement we make affects her directly. I needed to see her, and she needed to see me. Why? Because if you agree to this, she'll be living in my home. Calling me by some designation we'll have to decide on. Participating in the performance we're creating. Victoria handed him a glass. I won't have her traumatized because we failed to consider how this affects her life. It was, Ethan realized, the most thoughtful thing anyone had said to him in years. Most people treated Emma like an afterthought, a complication to his existence rather than the center of it. I have questions, he said. I expected you would. The contract says we'll share a residence but doesn't specify sleeping arrangements. You'll have your own bedroom, so will Emma. I'm not asking you to share my bed, Mr. Cole, just my last name. Heat crept up his neck. I wasn't assuming. Yes, you were. It's a reasonable assumption. Victoria sat in the chair beside him rather than behind her desk, a gesture that felt deliberately less formal. Let me be explicit about what this arrangement does and doesn't include. We will live together. We will attend social functions together. We will present as a married couple in all public settings. We will not have a sexual relationship. We will not develop romantic feelings. We will maintain professional boundaries at all times. What about Emma? How do we explain this to her? However you feel is appropriate. If you want to tell her the truth in age-appropriate terms, that's your choice. If you want to frame it differently, I'll support that, but I won't lie to her directly. Ethan appreciated that more than he could articulate. And after the year? What happens to her then? The trust fund is permanent. The debts will be paid regardless of how or why our arrangement ends. Your daughter's future is secure whether this works or not. Why would you do that? Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Because using a child's welfare as leverage is beneath me. What I'm asking from you is unorthodox, but I'm not a monster. Emma's security isn't conditional on your performance. They talked for another hour, Victoria answering every question with the same direct honesty. The contract would include clauses protecting both of them, outlining exactly what was expected, what was forbidden, and how dissolution would be handled. They'd have separate legal representation to ensure fairness. The marriage would be real in every legal sense, but would include a pre-drafted divorce agreement to be executed after 12 months. I need to know, Ethan said finally. If I agree to this, if I sign my name and change my daughter's entire life, what happens if you change your mind? What happens if 6 months in, you decide I'm not worth the trouble? I don't change my mind, Mr. Cole. When I commit to something, I see it through. Victoria's gaze didn't waver. Can you say the same? It was a challenge and a question and a test all at once. Ethan thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made, about Emma sleeping peacefully in an apartment with a radiator that barely worked while this woman offered him the resources to give his daughter every advantage he'd never had. I can, he said, but I want one addition to the contract. Which is? If at any point Emma is uncomfortable, if this arrangement is harming her in any way, I have the right to terminate immediately without penalty. Victoria considered this. Agreed. With one caveat, I have the same right. If I determine that this situation is detrimental to her well-being, I can require you to remove her from my home while maintaining the financial arrangements we've agreed to. You do that. I told you, Mr. Cole, I'm not a monster. Emma's laughter drifted from the terrace, where Margaret was apparently performing magic tricks with a quarter. The sound was pure joy, uncomplicated by debt or grief or impossible decisions. Ethan extended his hand. Then we have a deal, Ms. Hale. Victoria shook it, her grip firm and businesslike. We have a deal, Mr. Cole. And for the record, when we're alone or with Emma, you should probably call me Victoria. We are, after all, about to be married. The absurdity of it hit him then, the sheer impossible strangeness of what he'd just agreed to. He laughed, the sound startled out of him. What's funny? Victoria asked. I was just thinking about my wedding vows with Sarah. I promised to love her in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part. He shook his head. I'm about to stand in front of people and make promises I have no intention of keeping. We're making different promises, Victoria said quietly. We're promising to be honest about our dishonesty, to use each other transparently, to give each other exactly what we've negotiated for and nothing more. She stood, smoothing her suit. Some would argue that's more honest than most marriages. Before Ethan could respond, Emma came running back inside, cheeks flushed with excitement. Daddy! Ms. Margaret showed me how money disappears and then comes back, and she says they have hot chocolate in the cafeteria with marshmallows shaped like stars. That sounds amazing, baby girl. Can we come back here? Ethan glanced at Victoria, who was watching Emma with an expression he couldn't quite read. Actually, Emma, we need to talk about something. Ms. Hale and I have been discussing something important, and it's going to change things for us. Emma's face became serious with the gravity of childhood concern. Are you in trouble? No, sweetheart. But Ms. Hale and I are going to get married, which means we'll be moving into her home. You'll have your own room, and we'll... Are you going to be my new mommy? Emma asked Victoria directly. The question hung in the air like a live wire. Ethan saw Victoria's composure crack for just a second, something that might have been pain or panic flashing across her face before the control returned. No, Victoria said gently, I'm not going to be your new mommy. You have a mommy who loved you very much, and nobody can replace her. But if your daddy and I get married, I'll be part of your family in a different way. We'll figure out what that looks like together, okay? Emma thought about this with the seriousness of someone making an important decision. Can I still talk about Mommy? Anytime you want, Victoria said, and if you want to put pictures of her in your new room, that's completely fine. Okay. Emma turned back to Ethan. Is the new house bigger than ours? Much bigger. Does it have a bathtub? Our shower is too small. Despite everything, the insanity of the situation, the contract waiting to be signed, the massive life change they were about to undertake, Ethan felt laughter bubble up again. Yes, baby girl, it has a bathtub. Then I think it's okay. Emma nodded decisively. But Daddy, you have to promise you won't be sad anymore. The laughter died in his throat. Emma, you think I don't notice, but I do. You're sad at night when you think I'm sleeping. You're sad when you pay the bills. You're sad when Mrs. Chen gives us soup. Emma's small face was fierce with love and worry. Maybe If we live in a big house with bathtubs, you won't be sad anymore. Ethan pulled her into a hug, his eyes burning. Over Emma's head, he saw Victoria turn away, giving them privacy, but not before he caught something vulnerable in her expression, something that suggested maybe she understood exactly what it felt like to carry weight that never got lighter. "I'll try not to be sad," he whispered into Emma's hair. "I promise I'll try." The next 3 weeks were a blur of legal documents, financial disclosures, and carefully orchestrated logistics. Ethan met with his own attorney, paid for by Victoria, who reviewed every clause and confirmed that yes, this was insane, but no, it wasn't illegal, and yes, if Ethan was going to do something this crazy, at least the contract protected him. They set the wedding for a Thursday afternoon at City Hall, a deliberately low-key affair that would satisfy the legal requirements without attracting media attention. Victoria's lawyer would file the marriage certificate immediately, triggering the inheritance clause in her father's will. "What about your family?" Ethan asked during one of their planning meetings. They'd fallen into a routine of sorts, meeting 3 times a week to coordinate details, always professional, always maintaining the careful distance they'd agreed upon. "What about them? Won't they expect a ceremony, speeches, some kind of celebration?" Victoria's smile was sharp. "My father is dead. My mother has been irrelevant since the divorce 30 years ago. And my brother—" She paused, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. "Julian will find out when everyone else does. After the fact. He doesn't know about the will? He knows. He's counting on my failure." Victoria leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since this started, Ethan saw her look tired. "Julian has spent the last decade waiting for me to stumble, to prove that our father was right to doubt me. This marriage will destroy him. And that matters to you." "Shouldn't it?" The question was sharp. "He's undermined every decision I've made as CEO. He's leaked confidential information to competitors. He's actively campaigned with board members to have me removed." Her voice was cold, controlled fury. "So yes, Mr. Cole, watching him realize he's lost matters to me very much." Ethan thought about that as he packed up his and Emma's belongings, sorting their life into boxes that would be moved to Victoria's penthouse. Emma treated it like an adventure, carefully wrapping her stuffed animals and insisting on personally packing her princess crown. Mrs. Chen cried when he told her they were leaving. "You'll be okay?" she asked, gripping his hands with surprising strength for someone so small. "This woman, she'll take care of you both?" "It's complicated," Ethan said, because he couldn't explain the truth. "But yes, we'll be okay. Your Sarah, she would want this for you. She would want you to be happy." Ethan wasn't sure about that. Sarah had been fiercely independent, suspicious of wealth and the people who wielded it, but she'd also been practical, and she'd loved Emma more than anything. She would have sold her soul for their daughter's security. Maybe that's exactly what he was doing. The day before the wedding, Victoria called him to the penthouse to see the space they'd be living in. The building was on the Upper East Side, the kind of address Ethan had only ever seen in movies. The doorman knew Victoria by name. The elevator required a key. The hallway to her unit had exactly 2 doors. "You own the entire floor," Ethan said. "I own the entire building." Victoria unlocked the door. It seemed prudent. The penthouse was stunning. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art on the walls, furniture that looked sculptural rather than comfortable. It didn't look lived in so much as staged, a perfect representation of success that somehow felt hollow. "Emma's room is this way." Victoria led him down a hallway to a bedroom that was easily twice the size of their entire apartment. It was empty except for basic furniture waiting to be personalized. "I wasn't sure what she'd like," Victoria said. "I thought she should choose her own colors, her own decorations." "That's thoughtful. Don't sound so surprised. I'm capable of consideration." "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Victoria moved to the window, looking out over Central Park. "You think I'm cold, calculating, incapable of normal human emotion. I think you're very good at controlling what people see." She turned to face him, and for a moment the mask slipped. "So are you, Mr. Cole. So are you." They stood there in the empty room that would be Emma's, Two people about to bind themselves together in the most intimate legal way possible while remaining strangers. The absurdity of it should have been funny, but instead it felt weighted with something Ethan couldn't name. "Your room is across the hall," Victoria said finally. "Mine is at the other end of the penthouse. We'll share common spaces, but we'll maintain privacy. And for the record," she met his eyes directly, "I don't expect this to be comfortable. I don't expect us to become friends. But I do expect us to be civil, honest, and professional. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good." She handed him a key. "Move in tomorrow after the ceremony. My team will handle the logistics." Ethan looked at the key in his palm, a small piece of metal that represented access to a life he'd never imagined. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "Why haven't you asked me anything personal? You know everything about me, my debt, my wife, my daughter, but I don't know anything about you except what's in business magazines." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. "What would you like to know?" "Why you really need this marriage, not the inheritance. I understand that part, but there are other ways to fight a will. Legal challenges. You could tie this up in court for years." "And spend those years watching Julian dismantle everything I've built while the board questions my stability?" She shook her head. "No. This is faster, cleaner, and it's on my terms." "That's still not the real reason." Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Ethan saw her making a calculation, weighing how much truth she was willing to offer. "My father spent my entire life telling me I wasn't enough," she said finally. "That I was too cold, too ambitious, too unmarriageable. That I'd die alone because no man would tolerate a woman who refused to be diminished." Her voice was perfectly controlled, but he could hear the razor's edge underneath. "So he wrote a will that forces me to prove him right, or lose everything. And I refuse, absolutely refuse, to let a dead man's prejudice win. So this is revenge. This is survival." Victoria moved toward the door. "The ceremony is at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." She left him standing in Emma's future bedroom, holding a key to a life built on lies. And for the first time since agreeing to this arrangement, Ethan wondered if maybe they weren't as different as he'd thought. Maybe they were both just trying to survive the hands they'd been dealt. The wedding was exactly as impersonal as advertised. City Hall, a judge who'd performed thousands of identical ceremonies, witnesses pulled from Victoria's legal team who signed papers with the detached efficiency of people accustomed to strange requests from wealthy clients. Emma wore her princess crown and held a bouquet of flowers Victoria had arranged to have delivered that morning. She took her role as flower girl very seriously, scattering petals with solemn concentration. The vows were standard, the kind recited by strangers every day, words about love and honor that meant nothing in their context. But when Ethan said, "I do," looking into Victoria's ice-blue eyes, he felt the weight of what they were really promising: to use each other, to protect each other, to maintain the performance no matter what. Victoria said, "I do," without hesitation, her voice clear and strong. The judge pronounced them married. Emma clapped. And just like that, Ethan Cole became someone's husband again, not through love or fate or anything resembling romance, but through a contract designed to game a dead man's will. They signed the certificate. The lawyer filed the paperwork immediately, and by the time they left City Hall, the inheritance clause had been triggered. Victoria Hale was married, which meant Julian Hale had lost. "Did we just win?" Emma asked as they climbed into the car that would take them to their new home. Victoria smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask she usually wore. "Yes, Emma, we just won." In the back seat, Emma fell asleep against Ethan's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement. Victoria sat on the opposite side, looking out the window at the city she'd just secured her claim to. "No regrets?" she asked quietly. Ethan thought about his old apartment, about the bills he'd never have to fear again, about Emma's future stretching out before her, filled with possibilities instead of limitations. "Ask me in a year," he said. Victoria's expression was unreadable. "Fair enough." The car pulled up to the building, and the doorman welcomed them home like they'd been married for decades rather than hours. Emma woke up long enough to be amazed by the elevator, by the hallway, by the penthouse that was now somehow theirs. "Is this real?" she whispered, staring at the park spreading out beyond the windows. "It's real," Ethan said, not entirely sure he believed it himself. Victoria showed Emma to her room and they spent the next hour helping her unpack, transforming the empty space into something that belonged to a 6-year-old with very specific opinions about where her stuffed animals should live. When Emma finally passed out in her new bed, surrounded by familiar things in an unfamiliar place, Ethan and Victoria stood in the doorway watching her sleep. "She's resilient," Victoria said softly. "She's had to be. So have you." Ethan looked at the woman who was now legally his wife, who'd offered him salvation in exchange for a performance, who remained as much a mystery as she'd been the day she'd made her impossible offer. "So have you," he said. Victoria met his eyes, and for just a moment the distance between them felt less vast. Not gone, never gone, but maybe not as unbridgeable as he'd thought. "Get some rest, Mr. Cole. Tomorrow, the real performance begins." She left him standing in Emma's doorway, and Ethan listened to her footsteps fade toward the other end of the penthouse, toward the private space they'd agreed to maintain. He thought about the years stretching ahead of them, about all the ways this could go wrong, about what would happen when the performance became harder to distinguish from reality. But tonight, Emma was safe. She was sleeping in a real bed in a warm room with a future that didn't depend on him never getting sick, never losing his job, never making a single mistake. That had to be enough. It had to be. Because he'd made a deal, and Ethan Cole always kept his promises, even the ones that felt like lies. Ethan woke to sunlight streaming through windows that cost more than his car, and the disorienting realization that he had no idea where he was. Then it came back, the ceremony, the contract, the penthouse that was now somehow home. He lay still for a moment, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of wealth, central heating that worked silently, no clanking radiator, no neighbors screaming through thin walls. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Victoria. "Coffee is ready. We need to discuss the schedule." He found her in the kitchen, a sprawling space of marble countertops and appliances that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. She was already dressed for the office in a navy suit, her dark hair pulled back with the same precision she brought to everything else. A tablet sat beside her coffee cup, its screen filled with what looked like a military operation disguised as a calendar. "Good morning," she said without looking up. "Emma's still sleeping. I checked on her 20 minutes ago." The casual mention of his daughter sent a small shock through Ethan's system. This was his life now. Victoria Hale checking on Emma, making coffee, existing in the same domestic space he occupied. The strangeness of it threatened to overwhelm him. "Thank you," he managed. "There's a car service that will take Emma to school and pick her up. I've arranged for her enrollment at Ashford Academy to begin Monday. The tuition and fees are handled." Victoria finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "I assume you'll want to continue working at Hale Industries?" Yes, I need to work." "Then we need to address how we handle that. You can't continue in your current position. It would raise too many questions about favoritism and propriety." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Are you firing me?" "I'm promoting you. Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to the CFO. It's a legitimate position with actual responsibilities, not a vanity title. You'll earn it." She slid a folder across the counter. "This is the job description. Read it, and if you have concerns, we'll discuss them." He opened the folder, scanning through responsibilities that were significantly above his current pay grade. "This is a real job." "Did you think I'd give you a fake one? That would insult us both." Victoria poured him coffee without asking if he wanted any. "You're competent, Ethan. I'm simply placing you where that competence can be properly utilized. The fact that it also explains our connection to anyone who asks questions is a convenient side benefit. And if people think I only got the job because I married you, let them think what they want. You'll prove them wrong." She checked her watch. "I have a board meeting at 9. Julian will be there. This will be the first time he learns about the marriage." The way she said it, casual, almost anticipatory, made Ethan realize that Victoria had been planning this moment for months. Every detail choreographed, every reaction calculated. "You're looking forward to this," he said. "Immensely." Her smile was sharp. "Is that wrong?" I don't know. I've never had a sibling try to destroy me. Consider yourself fortunate. Victoria stood, smoothing her suit. Margaret will be here at 8 to help with Emma's morning routine until you're settled. She's surprisingly good with children, despite appearances. The ice sculpture has a heart? Everyone has a heart, Ethan. Some of us just don't see the point in wearing it outside our chest. She left him alone in the kitchen that still felt like a museum exhibit, and Ethan wondered if that comment had been about Margaret or about herself. Emma emerged an hour later, padding into the kitchen in her pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was born. She looked small in the massive space, a 6-year-old navigating a world built for adults who measured success in square footage. "Is this really our house now?" she asked. "For a while, baby girl." "Where's Victoria?" The casual use of her first name startled him. They hadn't discussed what Emma should call her, but apparently his daughter had made her own decision. "She went to work." "Does she like pancakes?" Ethan looked at the professional-grade range he had no idea how to operate. "I don't know. We'll have to ask her." Margaret arrived precisely at 8, and the transformation from severe assistant to competent childcare provider was so seamless that Ethan wondered if there was anything Victoria's people couldn't do. She had Emma fed, dressed, and entertained within 30 minutes, all while answering Ethan's stumbling questions about the building's amenities with patient efficiency. The gym is on the 2nd floor. The pool is indoor, heated year-round. Packages are held by the concierge. Dry cleaning can be arranged through the front desk. She handed him a leather binder. "This contains everything you need to know about building services, emergency contacts, and household management. Mrs. Hale suggested you familiarize yourself with it." "Mrs. Hale," Ethan repeated. "That's going to take some getting used to." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Mr. Cole, I've worked for Victoria for 12 years. I've never seen her make an impulsive decision. If she chose you, there's a reason. The reason is a contract and a dead man's will." "Is it?" Margaret tilted her head slightly. "I suppose time will tell." The board meeting started at exactly 9 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 43rd floor. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table with the casual authority of someone who'd earned her position through years of ruthless competence. Julian sat 4 chairs down on her right, his expression carefully neutral in the way of predators waiting for the right moment to strike. He had their father's features: sharp jaw, cold eyes, the kind of face that looked good on currency or in oil paintings commissioned to intimidate. But where Victoria's control seemed like strength, Julian's felt like barely contained rage. "Let's begin," Victoria said. "We have several items on the agenda, but first, a personal announcement." The room went still with the particular tension that comes before either very good or very bad news. "I was married yesterday. The legal requirements of my father's will have been satisfied. The inheritance is secure, and my position as CEO is no longer in question." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before chaos erupted. Julian's face went through several colors, settling on a shade of red that suggested either fury or an imminent cardiac event. "You what?" "I got married." "It's not complicated, Julian." Victoria's tone was pleasant, the kind of pleasant that concealed knives. "I believe congratulations are customary in these circumstances." "Who?" The word came out strangled. "Who did you marry?" "Ethan Cole. You met him at the Henderson presentation last year. He's a strategic analyst with an impressive track record and a practical understanding of operational efficiency." "You married an analyst?" Julian's laugh was ugly. "You actually expect us to believe you fell in love with some middle management nobody?" "I don't expect you to believe anything. I expect you to accept the legal reality that I am married. The will's conditions have been met, and your campaign to undermine my position is finished." Robert Chen, the CFO, and one of the few board members Victoria actually trusted, cleared his throat. "The legal team has verified the marriage certificate. Everything appears to be in order." "But in order?" Julian stood so abruptly his chair nearly toppled backward. "This is clearly a sham marriage designed to circumvent the spirit of Father's will. I'll challenge it. I'll have lawyers crawling over every aspect of this arrangement until..." "Until what, Julian?" Victoria's voice was ice. "Until you find evidence that my marriage isn't real? Good luck." We're legally married. We live together. We'll attend social functions together. By every measure that matters in the eyes of the law, this marriage is legitimate. The spirit of the will, the spirit of the will was that I should be controlled by a man, that I couldn't be trusted to run this company without male supervision, that I needed to be stabilized by marriage. Victoria leaned forward, and even from across the room, her fury was palpable. Well, congratulations, Julian. I'm married, the dead man gets his wish, and you get nothing. This isn't over. Yes, it is. But please waste your money on lawyers. Challenge away. Spend the next year investigating my marriage while I spend that year running this company without your interference. She smiled, and it was genuinely terrifying. I'm sure the board would love to fund your personal vendetta against your sister's happiness. Julian looked around the table, searching for allies, but the other board members suddenly found their papers fascinating. Whatever support he'd been cultivating evaporated the moment Victoria's marriage became legally binding. You think you've won, he said quietly. I know I have. Julian left the meeting without another word, and Victoria proceeded through the rest of the agenda like she hadn't just eviscerated her brother in front of the company's leadership. She was brilliant, ruthless, and completely in control. Ethan heard about it from David Park, who'd heard it from someone in legal, who'd heard it from someone who'd been in the room. Dude, your wife is terrifying, David said, leaning over the cubicle wall with the gleeful energy of someone sharing particularly good gossip. Apparently, Julian looked like he was going to have a stroke. She's not... Ethan stopped himself. She was his wife, legally, publicly, in every way that mattered to anyone outside their private arrangement. Yeah, she doesn't mess around. So when were you going to mention you married the CEO? I'm supposed to be your friend, man. It happened fast. Fast? David's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. How fast? Very fast. And the promotion to director, that happened to be coincidentally timed? Ethan met David's eyes steadily. I earned that position. I'm not saying you didn't. I'm saying it looks... I know how it looks. I'm going to prove how it is. Ethan turned back to his computer, effectively ending the conversation. But he could feel David's curiosity like a physical weight, and he knew this was just the beginning. Everyone would have questions. Everyone would make assumptions. And he and Victoria would have to sell the lie convincingly enough that the truth stayed buried. His phone buzzed. Victoria, dinner at 7. We need to discuss the Vanderbilt Charity Gala next week. It's our first public appearance. The first of many, Ethan realized. The performance was just beginning. Emma loved her new school with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of childhood. Ashford Academy was everything their neighborhood public school wasn't. Small class sizes, arts programs, a library that looked like something from a movie about wealthy intellectuals. She came home on her first day bubbling with stories about her new teacher, the playground with actual grass, the fact that they had music class every single day. And there's a girl named Sophie who has the same backpack as me, and she said we could be best friends, and at lunch they have 3 different kinds of milk, and... Emma paused for breath. Is Victoria home? Not yet, baby girl. She works late most nights. Can we wait for her? I want to tell her about school. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. Emma was attaching to Victoria faster than he'd anticipated, seeing her not as a stranger performing a role, but as a legitimate part of their family. He should have expected it. Emma had been desperate for maternal presence since Sarah died, but the speed of it still caught him off guard. We can wait, he said. Victoria arrived at 6:30, looking exhausted in a way she probably didn't let anyone at the office see. Emma launched into her school recap before Victoria had even set down her briefcase, and Ethan watched his boss, his wife, his whatever she was, transform from corporate predator to something almost soft. 3 kinds of milk, Victoria said seriously. That's very impressive. And we get to pick instruments next month for band class. I want to play the flute because it's pretty, and Sophie wants to play drums because they're loud. Both excellent choices. Emma chattered through dinner, a meal prepared by a chef service Victoria had arranged, and didn't seem to notice that the adults barely spoke. But after Emma went to bed, Victoria poured 2 glasses of wine and gestured for Ethan to join her on the balcony overlooking Central Park. The Vanderbilt Gala is Saturday, she said. It's a fundraiser for arts education. Very public, very visible. Everyone who matters will be there. And we need to convince them we're actually married. Yes. Victoria stared out at the city lights. We need to be comfortable with each other, natural, the kind of ease that comes from intimacy. We're not intimate. I know, but we need to fake it convincingly. She turned to face him, and in the dim light from inside, her features were softer than usual. So we practice. Practice? Physical comfort, the small touches that married couples do without thinking. Standing close. My hand on your arm. You touching my back. She demonstrated, placing her hand lightly on his forearm. See? It should look instinctive. Ethan forced himself not to flinch at the contact. This feels clinical. It is clinical. We're rehearsing. But her hand stayed on his arm, warm through the fabric of his shirt. Try putting your hand on my waist. He did, feeling supremely awkward, hyper-aware of every point of contact. Victoria was taller than Sarah had been, leaner, her body a collection of sharp angles rather than soft curves. Being this close to her felt dangerous in ways he couldn't articulate. You look like you're defusing a bomb, Victoria said dryly. I'm trying to be respectful. We're married, Ethan. Touching me isn't disrespectful. She adjusted his hand, placing it more naturally at the curve of her waist. There. That's better. They stood like that for a moment, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle. Close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she smiled more than her reputation would indicate. Why did you really choose me? He asked quietly. I told you, you were competent and desperate. That's not the whole truth. Victoria studied him, and he watched her make the same calculation she'd made in Emma's future bedroom. How much truth to offer, how much to keep locked away. You reminded me of someone, she said finally. Someone who stayed late not because he was ambitious, but because he cared. Someone who did the work without needing recognition. Her expression was carefully neutral. My father was like that, before the company consumed him, before success became the only thing that mattered. I thought you hated your father. I did. I also loved him. It's possible to feel both. She stepped back, breaking the contact. One more thing. We need wedding rings. Ethan looked down at his bare hand, realizing he hadn't even thought about it. Sarah's ring was in a box in his nightstand, too painful to wear but impossible to put away. I'll take care of it, Victoria said, reading his expression. I'm not asking you to replace anything, but we need the appearance. Okay. And Ethan? She paused in the doorway. Emma is getting attached to me, to this life. We should talk about how we manage that. I know. I don't want to hurt her when this ends. The admission surprised him. The first time Victoria had acknowledged that their arrangement had the potential to cause harm, that she cared about preventing it. Neither do I, he said. We'll figure it out. But as he stood alone on the balcony after she'd gone to her private wing of the penthouse, Ethan wondered if figuring it out was even possible. How did you protect a child from the consequences of choices you'd already made? How did you explain that the family you'd built was always meant to be temporary? The Vanderbilt Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because of course it was. Emma stayed home with Margaret, too young for this kind of event, and Ethan found himself in the back of a town car wearing a tuxedo that cost more than his first car, sitting beside a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice and starlight. Victoria wore a midnight blue gown that somehow managed to be both elegant and intimidating. Her hair swept up to expose the curve of her neck, diamonds at her throat and ears that caught the light like captured stars. You clean up well, she said, adjusting his bow tie with the casual intimacy they'd been practicing. You look... Ethan searched for a word that wouldn't sound inappropriate. Incredible. Thank you. She met his eyes. Remember, we're comfortable with each other. We're a couple who chose to be together. Try to look less like you're being held hostage. That's not... I'm teasing, Ethan. Her smile was small but genuine. Relax. We'll be fine. The museum was transformed into something from a different era, all candlelight and champagne, and people who moved through the world with the confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Victoria navigated it effortlessly, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. introducing him to business associates and society figures with the easy grace of someone who'd been performing this role her entire life. "And this is my husband, Ethan Cole." The word still sent a small shock through his system. Husband. The lie they were selling, the performance they'd agreed to maintain. People congratulated them. Women touched Victoria's arm conspiratorially and whispered about how she'd managed to keep the relationship secret. Men clapped Ethan on the shoulder and made jokes about punching above his weight class. He smiled. He played the role. He touched Victoria's back when appropriate and stood close enough to suggest intimacy without crossing the lines they'd drawn. And then Julian appeared. He moved through the crowd with the same predatory grace as his sister, but where Victoria's presence commanded respect, Julian's demanded attention. He was handsome in the way of people who'd never been told no, his smile sharp and his eyes calculating. "Victoria," he said, "how lovely to see you actually attending social functions. I'd begun to think you'd forgotten how." "Julian, I see you're still perfecting the art of passive aggression. And you're still pretending you don't need help running Father's company." His gaze shifted to Ethan. "So you're the analyst who managed to bag Manhattan's most eligible bachelorette. Impressive." Ethan felt Victoria's fingers tighten slightly on his arm. A warning, a reminder to stay calm. "I prefer to think she bagged me," Ethan said evenly. "Of course you do." Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, how did you two meet? I'm sure it's a fascinating story." "At work," Victoria said, "where I tend to meet competent people. You should try it sometime." The barb landed and Julian's expression darkened. "Enjoy your victory, sister. But contracts can be challenged. Marriages can be investigated. And when this little charade falls apart, I'll be there to pick up the pieces you drop." He walked away before Victoria could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed time was on his side. "That went well," Ethan said quietly. "He's going to dig. He'll hire investigators, interview people, look for any crack in our story. Will he find one?" Victoria turned to face him fully, and the vulnerability he saw in her expression was so unexpected that it took his breath away. "That depends on whether we can maintain this." "We can." "Can we?" She gestured to the room full of people pretending they weren't watching. "Look at us, Ethan. We barely know each other. We have a child between us, creating real emotional stakes. We're living together, performing intimacy, building something that feels real, but isn't. It's what we agreed to." "I know." But she looked uncertain for the first time since he'd met her. "I just wonder sometimes if we thought this through as carefully as we should have." Before Ethan could respond, a photographer approached, asking for a picture. They posed together, Victoria's body pressed against his side, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling like this was real. The camera flashed, and somewhere in that moment, between the performance and the reality, between the contract and the pretense, Ethan realized that the lines they'd drawn so carefully were already starting to blur. They stayed until midnight, playing the perfect couple, deflecting questions about their whirlwind romance with carefully rehearsed deflections. When they finally escaped to the car, Victoria kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief that was the most human sound he'd heard from her all night. "Thank God that's over," she muttered. "You were brilliant." "I was performing. There's a difference." She leaned her head back against the seat, suddenly looking exhausted. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" The question was so raw, so unexpected, that Ethan answered with equal honesty. "Every day." Victoria opened her eyes, meeting his gaze in the dim interior of the car. "What are we doing, Ethan?" "Surviving. Making the best choices we can with the options we have." "Is that what this is? The best choice?" He thought about Emma sleeping peacefully in a penthouse instead of a fourth-floor walk-up. He thought about the debt that no longer kept him awake at night. He thought about the trust fund that meant his daughter's future wasn't dependent on his ability to never get sick, never make a mistake, never stumble. "Yes," he said. "It is." Victoria studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, then we keep going. We keep going." They rode the rest of the way in silence, and when they arrived home, Margaret was waiting with a report that Emma had gone to bed easily, had asked for them both, had wanted to know when they'd be home. "She's getting attached," Margaret said quietly. echoing Victoria's earlier concern. I know, Victoria replied. We'll handle it. But as Ethan checked on Emma, sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, he wondered how exactly they were supposed to handle a 6-year-old's heart when they could barely manage their own arrangement. He found Victoria in the kitchen, still in her gown, drinking water and staring at nothing. We should talk about Emma, he said. I know. She's already calling you by your first name. She waits for you to come home. She's building you into her narrative of family. I know, Victoria repeated. What do you want me to do? Be cold to her? Push her away? No, but we need to be careful. When this ends, it won't end for her. Not really. Victoria set down her glass with careful precision. The trust fund is permanent. Her education is secured. Whatever happens between us, Emma's future is protected. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Then what are you talking about? Ethan took a breath. I'm talking about the fact that she's going to love you. Maybe already does. And when this contract expires and we go our separate ways, she's going to lose another mother figure. The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty. Victoria's face went very still. I'm not trying to replace Sarah. I know. But Emma is 6. She doesn't understand nuance. She just knows that you're here, you're kind to her, and you make her father smile for the first time since her mother died. Do I? Make you smile? The question caught him off guard. What? Emma thinks I make you smile. Do I? Ethan considered lying, maintaining the professional distance they'd agreed to, but they'd just spent an entire evening performing, and he was tired of pretending. Sometimes, he admitted, when you let your guard down, when you're real instead of perfect. Victoria's expression shifted into something he couldn't read. I'm never perfect. You do a convincing impression. So do you. They stood in the kitchen, her still in her gala gown, him in his tuxedo, and the weight of everything unsaid pressed down like a physical force. I should go to bed, Victoria said finally. Victoria? She paused. Thank you. For tonight. For all of this. He gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at the life she'd made possible. I know this arrangement serves your purposes, but it's changed everything for Emma and me. I don't think I've actually said thank you. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and he saw something raw and vulnerable underneath. You're welcome. She left him alone in the kitchen, and Ethan stood there for a long time trying to understand what was happening between them. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, a performance, a year of mutual benefit before they went back to being strangers. But nothing about Victoria Hale was simple, and he was beginning to suspect that nothing about this arrangement would be either. The photographs from the Vanderbilt Gala appeared in the society pages by Monday morning. Victoria and Ethan, caught in a moment that looked genuinely intimate, her laughing at something he'd said, his hand resting naturally at her waist, both of them utterly convincing as a couple who'd chosen each other. Ethan stared at the image on his computer screen, trying to remember what he'd said to make her laugh like that. The memory was already hazy, blurred by champagne and the exhaustion of maintaining a performance for 6 straight hours. David appeared at his cubicle. No, not his cubicle anymore. His office. The promotion had come with actual walls and a door, a space that announced his new position to everyone who passed by. You two look good together, David said, nodding at the screen. Almost makes me believe in romance again. It's not... Ethan caught himself. Thanks. Listen, I know things are weird right now. The promotion, the marriage, all of it happening at once. David lowered his voice. But I've known you for 3 years, man. You're not the type to use people. So if you married her, I'm assuming you had a good reason. The faith in David's voice made guilt twist in Ethan's stomach. I did. Good enough for me. David straightened. By the way, Julian's been asking questions about you. Where you came from, how long you've worked here, whether you've had any performance issues. Thought you should know. He's investigating me. Looks like it. Be careful, okay? That guy plays dirty. After David left, Ethan pulled up his own personnel file, looking at his employment history with fresh eyes. 3 years at Hale Industries, steady performance reviews, no red flags. But also no particular distinction until recently. On paper, he looked exactly like what Julian suspected. a nobody who'd somehow landed the ultimate prize. His phone buzzed. Victoria. Julian requested your personnel file from HR. They denied the request, but he's not going to stop. We need to be prepared. Ethan typed back. Prepared for what? Everything. The word sat on his screen like a threat, and Ethan realized that the easy part was over. They'd sold the marriage to society, to the board, to everyone who'd seen those photographs and believed the performance. Now came the harder work of maintaining it under scrutiny. That evening, Victoria came home early, a rarity that immediately put Ethan on alert. She found him and Emma in the living room building an elaborate castle out of blocks, while Emma narrated an intricate story about princesses and dragons. And then the dragon said he was actually nice, but everyone thought he was mean because he was big and had fire, Emma explained seriously. So the princess became his friend, and they had tea parties. That sounds very diplomatic of the princess, Victoria said, settling onto the couch with a grace that suggested she was more tired than she wanted to admit. Emma beamed. Do you want to help? You can be the queen. The queen sounds important. She is. She makes all the rules and protects everyone. Emma handed Victoria a wooden block crowned with a plastic tiara from her toy box. See? She even has a crown. Victoria took the makeshift queen with surprising solemnity, and for the next 20 minutes she played with Emma. Actually played, getting down on the floor in her work clothes, voicing the queen with just enough authority to make Emma giggle. Ethan watched them together and felt something dangerous shift in his chest. This wasn't part of the contract. Victoria caring about Emma's elaborate block castle kingdom, Emma's face lighting up when Victoria arrived home, the easy way they'd started orbiting each other, none of that had been in the 27 pages of legal language they'd signed. After Emma went to bed, Victoria poured wine for both of them without asking, a routine they'd fallen into without discussing. We need to talk about Julian, she said. I heard he requested my personnel file. That's just the beginning. He hired a private investigator. Victoria handed him a glass, her expression grim. I have someone monitoring their activities. They've already interviewed people at your old apartment building, talked to Emma's school, contacted your previous employers. Looking for what? Anything that suggests our marriage isn't legitimate. An ex-girlfriend you're still involved with. Evidence that we never actually lived together. Proof that this is a contractual arrangement. She took a long drink of wine. He's also looking into your finances, trying to establish a timeline that shows I paid you to marry me. Ethan felt cold. The debt payoff, the trust fund. All of that looks exactly like what it is, which is why we structured it carefully. The debts were paid by a separate entity, not by me personally. The trust fund was established before the marriage as a gift to Emma, not as compensation to you. Legally, it's defensible. But it looks suspicious. Everything looks suspicious if you're determined to find suspicion. Victoria set down her glass with controlled precision. We need to make this more convincing, more real. We're already living together. We attend events together. What more can we do? We can stop living like roommates. She met his eyes steadily. Right now, we occupy the same space but maintain separate lives. We have our own bedrooms at opposite ends of the penthouse. We barely see each other during the week. If someone were watching, and someone probably is, it wouldn't take much to establish that we're essentially strangers sharing an address. The implication settled over Ethan like a weighted blanket. What are you suggesting? That we actually act married, not just in public, but here, in private. Victoria's voice was carefully controlled, but he could hear the tension underneath. We need to create patterns that look like intimacy, shared meals, conversations, time spent together that isn't just contractual obligation. You want us to pretend even when no one's watching. I want us to build a life that can withstand scrutiny, because Julian won't stop until he finds something, and if we give him nothing but separate bedrooms and polite distance, he'll use that. Ethan thought about the years stretching ahead of them, about maintaining this level of performance, not just in public, but in every moment. That's not what we agreed to. I know, but circumstances have changed. Victoria stood, moving to the window overlooking the park. I'm not asking you to actually care about me, Ethan. I'm asking you to help me sell this convincingly enough that Julian's investigators find nothing but a couple who chose to be together. And if I can't do that? She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her expression was so unexpected it took his breath away. Then I lose everything I've worked for, and you lose everything I've given you. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not. The truth of it was undeniable. They'd bound themselves together with contracts and shared interests, and now they had to live with the consequences. Okay, Ethan said quietly. What do you need from me? Relief flashed across Victoria's face before the mask returned. Start having dinner with me, not just when Emma's here, but regularly. Talk to me about your day. Let me talk about mine. If we can't have actual conversations, we can't fake having them in public. That seems reasonable. And she hesitated, which was so unlike her that Ethan immediately tensed. We should probably share a bedroom, not a bed, she added quickly. But investigators can check bedroom usage patterns through household staff, utility consumption, that sort of thing. If we're maintaining completely separate sleeping quarters, it looks exactly like what it is. The suggestion sent heat flooding through Ethan's face. You want to share a bedroom? I want to appear to share a bedroom. We can put 2 beds in the master suite if you prefer, or I can sleep on the couch in the sitting room attached to my bedroom. But the primary bedroom should look lived in by 2 people. It was logical, strategic, exactly the kind of practical solution Victoria would devise to solve a problem. It also felt like crossing a line they'd been carefully maintaining. Let me think about it, Ethan said. Of course. Victoria moved toward her private wing, then paused. Ethan, I know this is more than you signed up for. If you want to renegotiate the contract, I don't. You haven't heard what I was going to offer. It doesn't matter. We made a deal. I keep my promises. He met her eyes across the dimly lit living room. Even the complicated ones. Something shifted in her expression, gratitude or respect, or maybe just relief. So do I. She left him alone with his thoughts and half a glass of wine, and Ethan sat in the silence of the penthouse, trying to figure out how sharing a bedroom with his fake wife had somehow become the least complicated aspect of this arrangement. The next morning, he found Emma in the kitchen with Victoria, both of them eating breakfast while Victoria reviewed something on her tablet. Daddy! Emma's face lit up. Victoria says I can come to her office today because there's no school and Margaret is sick. Ethan looked at Victoria, who met his gaze calmly. If you'd rather make other arrangements, I understand, but I have a relatively light day, and Emma expressed interest in seeing where I work. I want to see the tall building, Emma confirmed, and Victoria says they have really good cookies in the cafeteria. It was a test, Ethan realized, not of him, but of their arrangement. Could they be a family unit even in something as simple as taking Emma to work? Could they maintain the performance when it required actual coordination and shared responsibility? That sounds great, he said, watching relief flash across Victoria's face. What time should we leave? The 3 of them arrived at Hale Industries together, and the sight of Victoria walking through the lobby with a 6-year-old holding her hand sent visible shockwaves through the building. Employees stared. Whispers followed them to the elevator. By the time they reached the executive floor, Ethan knew that everyone in the building would know about this within the hour. Margaret, recovered from her mysterious illness, materialized with activity books and coloring supplies, setting Emma up in a small conference room adjacent to Victoria's office. I'll check on her every 30 minutes, Margaret said quietly, and I'll bring the promised cookies at 10. Thank you. Victoria crouched down to Emma's level. I have some boring work to do, but if you need anything, Margaret will help, okay? Okay. Can I draw a picture of our castle? I'd like that very much. Ethan watched the exchange with something that felt dangerously like hope. This wasn't performance. There was no one here to impress, no cameras capturing the moment. This was just Victoria being kind to his daughter because she wanted to be. His first meeting of the day was with the CFO and several department heads, discussing quarterly projections and resource allocation. Halfway through, David leaned over and whispered, Dude, the entire building is talking about you bringing your kid to work with Victoria. Is that a problem? Are you kidding? It's brilliant. You look like an actual family instead of a business arrangement. David grinned. Whoever's advising you on optics deserves a raise. Ethan didn't mention that no one was advising them, that Victoria had simply done something kind and it had accidentally served their purposes. Sometimes the best performances were the ones that weren't performances at all. At lunch, Victoria appeared at his office with Emma in tow. Margaret suggested we eat together, she said, and Ethan recognized the careful neutrality in her voice, the tone that meant this was strategic, not personal. There's a restaurant 2 blocks away that's quiet and appropriate for children. They walked through Midtown Manhattan like a family, Emma between them, chattering about the tall buildings and the hot dog vendors and the fact that pigeons were surprisingly bold. People moved around them without recognition, just another family navigating the lunch rush. The restaurant was exactly as Victoria described, quiet, upscale enough to feel special, but casual enough that Emma didn't feel out of place. They ordered, and Emma immediately started explaining her castle drawing in elaborate detail. And this is the Dragon's Cave, and this is where the Queen lives, and this is the special garden where they have their tea parties. She pointed to various colorful scribbles with utmost seriousness. The architecture is very impressive, Victoria said, studying the drawing with the same focus she probably brought to quarterly reports. Do you think dragons are real? Emma asked suddenly. I think real things can be disappointing, and imaginary things can be powerful, Victoria replied. So maybe dragons are as real as we need them to be. Emma considered this with the gravity of someone parsing complex philosophy. Mommy used to say that too, about fairy tales. The mention of Sarah created a moment of tension that Emma didn't notice, but Ethan felt acutely. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Your mommy sounds like she was very wise, Victoria said gently. She was. She knew everything. Emma took a bite of her sandwich, then looked up at Victoria with those wide, trusting eyes that broke Ethan's heart daily. Do you know everything too? Definitely not, but I'm learning. That's okay. Daddy says learning is more important than knowing. Victoria's gaze flickered to Ethan, something unreadable in her expression. Your daddy is right. They finished lunch, returned to the office, and resumed their separate work. But something had shifted. Some invisible line crossed that neither of them had planned for. This was supposed to be transactional, but Emma was making it personal with every innocent question, every drawing gifted to Victoria, every moment she built them into something that resembled an actual family. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Victoria brought up the bedroom situation again. I had the master suite prepared, she said without preamble. There are 2 beds, a king in the main room and a queen in the sitting area. You can choose which you prefer. I've had your things moved. Ethan felt something like panic flutter in his chest. You decided without asking me? You said you'd think about it. I assumed that meant yes. Her expression was carefully neutral. If I was wrong, I'll have your things moved back. He thought about Julian's investigators, about the need to make this convincing, about the fact that they were already in too deep to maintain the careful distance they'd started with. No, he said finally. You weren't wrong. Victoria nodded once. The bathroom has 2 sinks and separate closet space. We won't be in each other's way. This is strange. Everything about this is strange, Ethan. We're just acknowledging reality. She moved toward the master suite, then paused. For what it's worth, I'll try to respect your privacy. We're sharing space, not intimacy. The distinction should have been comforting. Instead, it just highlighted how blurred the lines had already become. Ethan followed her to the master suite, a space he'd never actually entered before. It was massive, decorated in the same modern style as the rest of the penthouse, with those floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city feel both impossibly close and completely distant. The main bed was positioned to face the view, covered in expensive linens that probably cost more than his monthly rent used to. The sitting area held a smaller bed dressed identically, positioned near a reading nook with built-in bookshelves. I'll take the smaller bed, Ethan said. Are you sure? I don't mind. I'm sure. They established a routine with the awkwardness of strangers learning to share space. Victoria showered first while Ethan checked on Emma one last time. Then he showered while Victoria prepared for bed with what seemed like an elaborate skincare routine. They moved around each other carefully, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. When they finally settled into their respective beds, her in the main room, him in the sitting area with only a partial wall between them, the intimacy of it was overwhelming. He could hear her breathing, the rustle of sheets as she shifted position, the quiet sounds of another person existing in the same space. Ethan? Her voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it's uncomfortable. We're making it work. Silence settled over them, and Ethan lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the city and the woman who was his wife in name only, wondering how they'd gotten from a contract signed in desperation to this strange domestic intimacy that felt both artificial and achingly real. The weeks that followed established new patterns. They had breakfast together, the three of them navigating morning routines with increasing ease. Ethan and Victoria commuted to work together, maintaining the appearance of a couple who chose to spend time together even when they didn't have to. They had dinner as a family most nights, Emma chattering between them, oblivious to the performance her presence necessitated. And at night, they shared a bedroom, maintaining careful boundaries while existing in a space that felt more intimate than anything Ethan had experienced since Sarah died. Julian's investigation continued in the background, a constant threat they navigated by building a life that looked increasingly convincing. They attended gallery openings and charity dinners. They had brunch with Victoria's business associates. They took Emma to Central Park on Sunday afternoons, the three of them walking like any other family enjoying the autumn weather. "You're good at this," Victoria said one Sunday afternoon, watching Ethan push Emma on the swings. "At what?" "At making this look real. At being present even when you don't have to be." "I'm not performing right now. There's no one here to impress." "I know." She was quiet for a moment, watching Emma fly higher with each push. "That's what makes it convincing." Before Ethan could respond, Emma shouted that she wanted to try the monkey bars. Victoria went with her, spotting her carefully, while Emma navigated the bars with fierce concentration. Ethan watched them together, his daughter and his fake wife, and felt the dangerous warmth in his chest intensify. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction. A year of mutual benefit before they returned to their separate lives. But Emma loved Victoria with the uncomplicated intensity of childhood. And Victoria, despite her careful control, clearly cared about Emma in return. And Ethan found himself looking forward to coming home, to the strange domestic life they'd built, to conversations with Victoria that had started as performance and had somehow become real. The danger of it terrified him. That night, after Emma was asleep and they were preparing for bed in their shared space, Victoria brought it up. "We're getting too comfortable," she said, her voice tight with something that might have been fear. "Is that a problem?" "It could be. We agreed to professional boundaries. We agreed this was temporary." "It is temporary." "Then why does it feel less temporary every day?" She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her expression was devastating. "I'm not supposed to care if Emma asks for me when she's scared at night. I'm not supposed to notice when you smile at something I say. I'm not supposed to feel relieved when I come home and you're both here." The admission hung between them, dangerous and honest. "I don't know what you want me to say," Ethan said quietly. "I want you to tell me this is still just performance, that you're not getting attached, that when this year ends, you'll walk away without looking back. Can you do that?" Victoria's expression crumpled for just a second before the control returned. "I don't know anymore." Ethan crossed the space between them, standing close enough to see the fear in her ice-blue eyes. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe being uncertain means we're doing this right. Or it means we're making a mistake that's going to hurt everyone involved. Maybe. But we're in it now." He reached out, touching her hand with careful gentleness. "So we figure it out together." Victoria looked at their joined hands like she couldn't quite believe they were real. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I don't get scared, but I'm scared of this." "So am I." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd entered an arrangement with clear boundaries, discovering that emotions didn't respect contracts or intentions. Then Victoria pulled away, creating distance with visible effort. "We should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow there's a board meeting. Julian will be there." The reminder of reality was like cold water. They were still performing, still maintaining appearances, still protecting themselves from discovery. But as Ethan lay in his bed listening to Victoria breathe in the darkness, he wondered if maybe they'd already been discovered, not by Julian's investigators, but by something more dangerous, by the truth of what they were becoming to each other. Days later, the first real crisis arrived in the form of a phone call from Victoria's lawyer. Julian filed a formal challenge to the marriage, Gerald Patterson explained over speakerphone, while Victoria sat rigid in her office chair. Ethan stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support that had become instinctive. He's claiming fraud, breach of contract, and violation of the will's intent. On what grounds? Victoria's voice was ice. He's arguing that your marriage is a sham designed solely to circumvent the inheritance requirements. He has affidavits from building staff suggesting you maintain separate bedrooms, from neighbors claiming they've never seen displays of affection, from unnamed sources alleging the marriage was arranged for financial benefit. Ethan felt Victoria's shoulder tense under his hand. Can he prove any of that? Not definitively, but he doesn't need proof for discovery. He can subpoena records, depose witnesses, investigate your finances. This could take months and get very invasive. Let him try, Victoria said. Our marriage is legal and legitimate. Is it? Gerald's voice was gentle but firm. Because if there's anything at all, that could support Julian's claims, now is the time to tell me. Victoria's hand came up to cover Ethan's where it rested on her shoulder, and he felt her fingers tremble slightly. There's nothing. After the call ended, they sat in silence, the weight of Julian's challenge settling over them like a physical force. He's going to destroy us, Victoria said quietly. He'll subpoena the contract. He'll find the debt payoff, the trust fund, all of it. The contract is protected by attorney-client privilege. Only until a judge decides it's relevant to a fraud investigation. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. I didn't think he'd actually do this. File legal challenges. Risk the company's stability just to prove me wrong. What do we do? Victoria turned to face him, and the fear in her expression was raw and unguarded. We prove him wrong. We make this marriage so convincing that no judge, no investigator, no jury would ever question its legitimacy. How? She crossed the space between them, and Ethan saw her make a decision in real time, saw the moment she chose to cross another line they'd carefully maintained. We stop pretending, she said. We stop maintaining distance. We stop protecting ourselves from this. Victoria, I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, Ethan. I'm asking you to let this be real enough to survive scrutiny. Because if Julian wins, everything we've built falls apart. Emma loses her trust fund, you lose your position, and I lose everything I've ever worked for. The stakes had never been clearer. They'd bound themselves together with contracts and shared interests, and now they had to decide how far they were willing to go to protect what they'd created. Ethan thought about Emma, about the life she had now versus the life they'd been living before. He thought about Victoria, who'd given them everything she'd promised and more. He thought about the fact that somewhere in the past few months, this performance had started to feel like something he didn't want to lose. Okay, he said. No more distance. No more protection. Victoria's relief was palpable. Thank you. But Victoria, if we're doing this, really doing this, then we need to be honest with each other. No more masks, no more performance, just us. Just us, she repeated, and the words felt like a promise neither of them was sure they could keep, but they were going to try, because the alternative was losing everything. The decision to stop pretending changed everything and nothing all at once. They still lived in the same penthouse, still shared the same bedroom, still maintained the routines they'd established over months of careful performance. But now there was an honesty to it that made Ethan's chest feel tight whenever Victoria smiled at him across the breakfast table, or when her hand found his without calculation at public events. The legal battle with Julian escalated quickly. Depositions were scheduled. Financial records were subpoenaed. Victoria's lawyer called with updates that grew progressively more invasive. Building staff questioned about their sleeping arrangements. Margaret interviewed about the nature of their relationship. Even Mrs. Chen from Ethan's old building contacted about whether he'd ever mentioned marriage plans before meeting Victoria. They're building a timeline, Victoria explained one evening, reviewing documents spread across the dining table while Emma colored nearby. Trying to prove that our relationship happened too quickly to be genuine, that the financial arrangements preceded any emotional connection. Which they did, Ethan said quietly, mindful of Emma's presence. But they don't need to know that. Victoria's voice was tight with stress. We just need to present a coherent narrative that withstands scrutiny. Emma looked up from her drawing. What's scrutiny? It means people looking very carefully at something, Victoria said, her tone shifting to something gentler. Like when you're trying to find all the hidden objects in those picture books. Oh, Emma returned to her coloring, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Ethan met Victoria's eyes across the table, and he saw the exhaustion there, the weight of fighting her brother while running a company while maintaining a marriage that was becoming less fake by the day. He stood, moving behind her chair and placing his hands on her shoulders. Take a break, he said quietly. This will all be here tomorrow. Victoria leaned back into his touch, and the gesture was so natural, so unthinking, that it took them both a moment to realize what they'd done. This wasn't performance. There was no one here to convince. This was just comfort offered and accepted. You're probably right, she murmured. I usually am. He felt her laugh softly, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly under his hands. Emma abandoned her drawing and climbed into Victoria's lap with the casual affection of a child who'd forgotten that Victoria was supposed to be temporary. Can we watch a movie? The princess one? I think that can be arranged. Victoria adjusted to accommodate Emma's weight, wrapping her arms around the little girl automatically. Which princess one? You have at least 7. The one with the ice castle and the sisters. They ended up on the couch together, Emma between them, watching a movie they'd all seen at least 4 times. Halfway through, Emma fell asleep against Victoria's shoulder, and Victoria made no move to disturb her. Ethan watched them in the flickering light from the television, his daughter and his wife, who wasn't really his wife, except she was starting to feel like she was, and felt something dangerous settle in his chest. We should put her to bed, he whispered, in a minute. Victoria's hand moved through Emma's hair with unconscious tenderness. She's peaceful like this. You're good with her. She makes it easy. Victoria's voice was soft, almost wondering. I never thought about having children. It seemed incompatible with running a company, with maintaining control. But Emma, she paused, looking down at the sleeping child. She doesn't need me to be perfect. She just needs me to be present. Is that hard for you, being imperfect? Victoria's laugh was quiet and sad. It's terrifying. I've spent my entire life building armor, and your daughter walks through it like it doesn't exist. Ethan reached across Emma's sleeping form and took Victoria's hand. Maybe the armor isn't as necessary as you think. Maybe. But she didn't sound convinced. They carried Emma to bed together, moving with the coordinated ease of parents who'd done this many times. Emma stirred slightly when they tucked her in, mumbling something about ice castles before settling back into sleep. In their shared bedroom afterward, the intimacy felt different somehow. Heavier. More weighted with possibility. The deposition is next week, Victoria said, changing into sleep clothes with her back to him, a courtesy they'd maintained despite sharing space. Julian's lawyers are going to ask invasive questions about our relationship, our sleeping arrangements, our private life. What do we tell them? The truth. She turned to face him, and her expression was carefully neutral. That we share a bedroom, that we're building a life together, that what started as convenience has become something more complicated. Is that what this is? Complicated? Victoria sat on the edge of the main bed, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. I don't know what this is anymore. I know what it was supposed to be. I know what the contract says. But that's not what's happening here. Ethan moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. What do you want it to be? I don't know if I'm allowed to want anything beyond what we agreed to. We're rewriting the agreement, remember? No more distance, no more protection. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. So tell me what you want. Victoria looked at their joined hands for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want Emma to keep climbing into my lap like she belongs there. I want to come home and have you ask about my day like you actually care. I want to stop calculating every interaction and just exist in this space we've created. That doesn't sound complicated. That sounds like a family. We're not a family. We're a contract with feelings we weren't supposed to develop. Aren't we both? Ethan turned to face her fully. Victoria, look at us. We have breakfast together. We take Emma to the park. We share a bedroom. We hold hands without thinking about it. If that's not a family, what is it? A performance that got away from us. Or maybe it stopped being a performance and became something real. The words hung between them, dangerous and true. Victoria's expression shifted through several emotions: fear, hope, resistance, longing, before settling on something that looked like resignation. "I'm not good at real," she said quietly. "I'm good at control and strategy and winning. But this," she gestured between them, "this isn't something I can control my way into succeeding at." "Good thing you have a partner then." "Is that what you are? My partner?" Ethan lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles before he could think better of it. "I signed a contract saying I'm your husband. Everything else is just details we're figuring out as we go." Victoria's breath caught at the gesture, and Ethan realized he'd crossed another line without meaning to. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder with a sigh that sounded like surrender. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of Julian, of losing everything, but mostly of this. Of wanting something I might not get to keep. I know the feeling." They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness of their shared bedroom. Two people who'd started as strangers discovering that proximity and pretense had somehow created something that felt achingly genuine. The deposition was scheduled for Tuesday morning at Julian's lawyer's office in Midtown. Victoria wore her armor, a charcoal suit that made her look untouchable, her hair pulled back with severe precision, her expression carefully blank. But in the car ride over, she held Ethan's hand so tightly he could feel her pulse racing. "Just tell the truth," Gerald Patterson had advised them. "The more honest you are about the unconventional nature of your relationship, the harder it is for them to prove fraud." The conference room was aggressively neutral, bland corporate art on the walls, a table large enough to seat 12, windows overlooking the kind of view that cost obscene amounts of money. Julian sat on one side with his legal team, and the satisfaction on his face when they entered made Ethan want to hit him. "Victoria," Julian said with false warmth, "so glad you could make time in your busy schedule." "Let's skip the pleasantries, Julian. We both know why we're here." The deposition was brutal. Julian's lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Rothman, who looked like she ate weak arguments for breakfast, started with seemingly innocent questions about how they met, when they started dating, what attracted them to each other. "Mr. Cole worked for Hale Industries," Victoria answered calmly. "We had several professional interactions over the years. The personal relationship developed gradually." "Gradually?" Patricia repeated. "And yet you were married within weeks of your first date?" "When you know, you know." "How convenient, especially given that your father's will required marriage by your 35th birthday, which was," Patricia consulted her notes, "6 months from the date of your marriage." "The timing was coincidental." "Was it? Let's talk about Mr. Cole's financial situation prior to your marriage. He had significant debt, correct?" Ethan felt his jaw tighten, but Gerald had prepared him for this. "I had medical debt from my late wife's illness and student loans. Nothing unusual for someone in my position. And all of that debt was paid off shortly after your marriage. By a family trust established for my daughter's benefit," Ethan said evenly. "The debt payoff was incidental to the trust's creation." "How fortunate." Patricia's smile was sharp. "Tell me, Mr. Cole, do you love your wife?" The question landed like a physical blow. Beside him, Victoria went very still. Ethan met Patricia's eyes steadily. "Yes." "You hesitated." "I was surprised by the question, but yes, I love my wife." "And Mrs. Hale, do you love your husband?" Victoria's expression didn't change, but Ethan felt her hand tighten on his under the table. "Yes." "How would you describe your relationship?" "Unconventional," Victoria said. "We met through work. We have a significant age difference. We come from different backgrounds. But we choose each other every day, and we're building a life together." "In separate bedrooms?" "We share a bedroom." Victoria's voice was ice. "If you've been questioning my household staff about intimate details of my private life, you already know that." Patricia consulted her notes. "Your building manager mentioned seeing Mr. Cole leave your apartment at odd hours during the early weeks of your marriage. He was checking on Emma. She had nightmares after we moved." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Is there a point to this line of questioning, or are you simply enjoying invading my privacy?" The point, Mrs. Hale, is determining whether your marriage is legitimate or a fraudulent arrangement designed to circumvent your father's will. My marriage is as legitimate as any other, more so than some, given that we're honest about our reasons for being together, which are love, companionship, partnership. Victoria's expression was perfectly controlled. The same reasons most people marry. And the massive financial benefit that came with satisfying your father's will requirements? That had nothing to do with it? Of course it did. Victoria's admission seemed to catch Patricia off guard. I won't pretend money wasn't a factor. I needed to be married to maintain control of my company. Ethan needed financial stability for his daughter. We were honest about those needs from the beginning, but what we've built goes beyond the original arrangement. How convenient that it developed after the legal requirements were met. How typical that people find genuine connection even in unconventional circumstances, Victoria countered. Or are you suggesting that any marriage with practical considerations is inherently fraudulent? The deposition continued for 3 more hours, Patricia probing for weaknesses, contradictions, any hint that their relationship was purely transactional. They answered every question, maintained their story, presented a united front. When it was finally over, they left the building in silence, climbing into the waiting car with the exhaustion of people who'd just survived combat. That was, Ethan started. Awful, Victoria finished. She's good. She got us to admit the financial arrangements, the unconventional beginning, all of it. But we were honest. Gerald said honesty was our best defense. Honesty can also be ammunition. Victoria leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. Did you mean it? Mean what? What you said. That you loved me. The car felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Ethan looked at the woman beside him, his wife, his partner, his something he didn't have words for yet, and realized the truth had been there for weeks, hiding in plain sight. Yes, he said quietly. I think I did. Victoria's eyes opened, and the vulnerability in them was devastating. That wasn't part of the contract. I know. It makes everything more complicated. I know that too. She turned to face him fully, and Ethan saw her wrestling with something, fear or hope, or the dangerous space between them. I'm not good at this. At being loved or loving back. I don't know if I can give you what you need. I'm not asking for anything you can't give. I'm just being honest about where I am. And where are you? Ethan took her hand, pressing it against his chest where his heart was racing. Here, with you, trying to figure out if what we built to fool everyone else might actually be worth keeping. Victoria's breath hitched, and for a moment Ethan thought she might pull away, retreat behind the armor she wore so well. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd exchanged brief, performative kisses at their wedding, at public events, whenever cameras were watching. But this was different. This was Victoria choosing connection over control, vulnerability over safety, him over the carefully maintained distance that had protected her for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Victoria rested her forehead against his. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. Probably. Julian will use it against us if he finds out. He'll say we're lying about the timeline, that the feelings developed after we got caught. Let him. We'll prove him wrong. How? Ethan pulled back enough to meet her eyes. By being exactly what we are. 2 people who started with a contract and ended up with something real. The driver cleared his throat discreetly, reminding them they weren't alone. Victoria straightened, her composure returning like a mask sliding back into place, but her hand stayed in Ethan's. We should tell Emma, she said, that this is becoming permanent, that we're not just pretending anymore. Are we? Becoming permanent? Victoria's smile was small but genuine. I think we might be. They told Emma that night after dinner, the 3 of them sitting together in the living room while Emma built another elaborate block castle. Emma, we need to talk to you about something, Ethan started. Emma looked up with immediate concern. Are we leaving? No, baby girl, the opposite. He glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragement. You know how Victoria and I got married as part of an agreement to help each other with some grown-up problems? Yeah, you said it was complicated. It was, it is, but it's also become something more. Ethan chose his words carefully. Victoria and I care about each other, and we want to keep being a family, even after the agreement ends. Emma looked between them with the seriousness of someone processing important information. So, Victoria is my mom now? The question hit Victoria visibly. Ethan saw her swallow hard before answering. I can't be your mom, Emma. You have a mom who loved you very much, and nobody can replace her. Victoria's voice was gentle. But I can be someone else in your life, someone who cares about you and wants to be here for you. Like a bonus parent? Exactly like that. Emma considered this, then went back to her blocks. Okay, can Victoria help me with the castle tower? It keeps falling down. Just like that, Emma accepted the strange reality of their lives with the resilience of childhood. Victoria moved to help with the tower, and Ethan watched them work together, his daughter and his wife, building something that would probably fall down eventually, but mattered in the building. Later, after Emma was asleep, Ethan found Victoria on the balcony despite the November chill. You okay? He asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. I told Emma I couldn't be her mother. You were being honest. That's good. Is it? Victoria's voice was tight. Because watching her accept that so easily, like she's used to people leaving or not being what she needs, that broke something in me. Ethan pulled her close, and she let him, tucking herself against his chest like she belonged there. Emma has had to be resilient, but that doesn't mean she doesn't also know love when she sees it. She loves you, Victoria, the way she is, no conditions. I don't know how to deserve that. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to accept it. They stood together in the cold, New York glittering below them, and Ethan felt the shift between them solidify into something undeniable. This wasn't performance anymore. This wasn't a contract or an arrangement or a strategic partnership. This was falling in love with his fake wife and realizing that somewhere along the way, she'd become his real one. The board meeting the following week was tense with unspoken conflict. Julian had clearly been briefed on the deposition, and his expression was smug in a way that made Ethan want to throw something. I've received concerning information, Julian announced halfway through the agenda, suggesting that Victoria's marriage may not be as legitimate as she claims. Victoria's expression didn't change. You're welcome to your concerns, Julian. The legal system will address them appropriately. Will it? Because I have affidavits suggesting financial arrangements that preceded any romantic relationship. I have testimony about separate bedrooms and suspicious timelines. He leaned forward. I have enough to make this very uncomfortable for you. Then make it uncomfortable. Victoria's voice was steel. File your motions. Call your witnesses. Spend the next year trying to prove that two people couldn't possibly have found genuine connection in unconventional circumstances. She paused. But while you're doing that, I'll be running this company. And every day you waste on this vendetta is another day you prove Father was right about you. Father was right about you too, that you're too cold to maintain a real relationship, that you'd do anything, even fabricate a marriage, to get what you want. You're confusing me with yourself, Julian. The room went silent with the kind of tension that precedes either violence or revelation. Robert Chen cleared his throat. Perhaps we should return to the actual agenda items. But Julian wasn't done. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. If Victoria's marriage is proven fraudulent, her judgment is compromised. The board should remove her as CEO, pending the resolution of the legal challenges. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, nobody wanting to be the first to choose sides. Victoria stood slowly, and Ethan recognized the expression on her face, the same one she'd worn when she'd made her impossible offer in her office all those months ago. You want to vote? Fine, but let's be clear about what you're really asking. She looked around the table. Julian isn't concerned about the company. He's concerned that I succeeded where he expected me to fail, that I found a way to meet Father's ridiculous requirements while also building something genuine. Genuine, Julian scoffed. You paid a desperate man to marry you. I offered a mutually beneficial arrangement to someone I respected. What we built from that foundation is none of your business. It's the board's business if what? Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. If I'm happy, if I've created a stable home life that actually makes me better at this job, If I've proven that women can have both professional success and personal fulfillment without sacrificing one for the other? She leaned forward. That's what really bothers you, isn't it? Not that my marriage might be fake, but that it might be real. That I might have everything Father said I couldn't have. The truth of it hung in the air, and Ethan saw several board members nod slightly, their allegiance shifting. The vote, Julian demanded. Robert Chen looked around the table. All those in favor of a vote of no confidence in Victoria Hale's leadership. Julian's hand went up. So did two others, board members Ethan recognized as Julian's known allies. All opposed? The rest of the hands rose, including Robert's. Motion fails. Robert's voice was firm. Victoria retains her position as CEO. Julian, if you wish to continue pursuing legal challenges to the inheritance, that's your prerogative. But this board supports Victoria's leadership. Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Victoria's voice was quiet but absolute. You lost, Julian. The will's requirements were met. The board supports me. And no matter how many lawyers you hire or affidavits you collect, you can't undo the fact that I won. Julian left without another word, and the meeting continued with the kind of awkward professionalism that follows public conflict. But when it ended, several board members approached Victoria privately, offering support and apologizing for Julian's behavior. Ethan waited until they were alone in her office to pull her into his arms. You were incredible, he said into her hair. I was terrified. Victoria's voice was muffled against his chest. If that vote had gone the other way, it didn't. The board supports you. Julian's running out of options. He still has the legal challenge. The depositions aren't over. Then we'll face those too, together. Victoria pulled back enough to meet his eyes. When did you become so certain about us? Probably around the time you helped Emma build a block castle and didn't complain when she put your expensive work blazer on the dragon to keep him warm. The memory made Victoria laugh, and the sound was so genuine, so unguarded, that Ethan couldn't help but kiss her. This time she kissed him back without hesitation, without calculation, just pure wanting. They pulled apart when Margaret knocked on the door, but Victoria kept his hand in hers. Yes, Margaret. Your 3 o'clock is here, and Emma's school called. She wants to know if she can stay late for the drama club interest meeting. Victoria's face softened immediately. Tell them yes, and arrange for the car to pick her up at 5. After Margaret left, Ethan raised an eyebrow. Drama club? She mentioned wanting to try it. Something about playing a princess in a real play instead of just with blocks. Victoria smiled. I thought it might be good for her, building confidence, making friends. You're really good at this parenting thing. I'm trying. She squeezed his hand. Now go. I have actual work to do and you're distracting. Distracting in a good way, in a way that makes me want to cancel my afternoon and take you home, which is extremely inconvenient. Heat flooded through Ethan at the implication. Tonight? Tonight, Victoria agreed, and the promise in her eyes made his pulse race. That evening, they picked Emma up from drama club together, listening to her excitedly explain the difference between stage left and stage right. They had dinner as a family, cleaned up together, got Emma ready for bed together. And then, for the first time since signing their contract, they went to bed together with intention rather than necessity. We don't have to... Ethan started, but Victoria silenced him with a kiss. I know we don't have to. I want to. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But Ethan, I need you to understand something. This changes everything. If we do this, we can't go back to being strangers performing for an audience. I don't want to go back. Neither do I. But I need to hear you say it, that you understand what this means. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. It means we stop pretending this marriage is temporary. It means we choose each other for real. It means Emma gets to keep both of us, and we figure out how to make this work beyond the contract. That's terrifying. I know, but I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you. Victoria's kiss was answer enough, and everything that followed was a choice made over and over again, to be vulnerable, to be present, to be real with each other in ways the contract had never anticipated. Later, lying tangled together in the darkness, Victoria traced patterns on Ethan's chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I entered into this arrangement to save my company and ended up saving myself instead." She lifted her head to look at him. "You and Emma, you made me remember that control isn't the same as strength, that vulnerability can be power, that sometimes the best victories are the ones you didn't plan for." Ethan pulled her closer. "We saved each other." "Is that what happened?" "Yeah, I think it is." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who'd started as strangers bound by contract and ended up as something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. The marriage that was supposed to be fake had become the realest thing in both their lives, and neither of them wanted to go back to pretending. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, and for the first time in longer than Ethan could remember, he woke up feeling completely at peace. Victoria was still asleep beside him, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face relaxed in a way it never was during waking hours. He watched her for a moment, still marveling at how they'd gotten here, from a desperate contract signed in her office to this quiet intimacy that felt more real than anything he'd planned for. She stirred, her eyes opening to find him already watching her. "How long have you been awake?" Her voice was rough with sleep, and Ethan found even that endearing. "Not long, I was just thinking." "About?" "About how we need to tell Gerald that the contract terms have changed, that this isn't temporary anymore." Victoria's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like cautious hope. "You're sure?" "Because once we tell people this is real, there's no going back to the safety of pretending it's all performance." "I've never been more sure of anything." Ethan leaned down to kiss her, soft and lingering. "Except maybe agreeing to marry you in the first place. That was desperation, not certainty. Best desperate decision I ever made." They were interrupted by Emma bursting into the room with the boundless energy of a 7-year-old who'd apparently forgotten about things like privacy or knocking. She launched herself onto the bed between them, her grin infectious. "You're both still here," Emma announced, as if this was a remarkable discovery. "Where else would we be?" Victoria asked, pulling Emma into a hug with the natural affection that had developed over months of proximity and choice. "I don't know, but you're here together, and that makes me happy." Emma snuggled between them, content in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" "I think that can be arranged," Victoria said, already reaching for her phone to text their chef service. "Not the fancy ones, the ones Daddy makes, with the chocolate chips." Victoria looked at Ethan with amusement. "You make pancakes with chocolate chips?" It's Emma's favorite Saturday tradition, from before. The word hung in the air, before this penthouse, before Victoria, before their lives had transformed into something he still couldn't quite believe was real. "Then we should definitely continue the tradition." Victoria climbed out of bed, and Emma followed her like a devoted shadow, both of them heading toward the kitchen while chattering about the proper chocolate chip to batter ratio. Ethan followed more slowly, still adjusting to this new reality where mornings included both his daughter and his wife, where traditions from his old life merged seamlessly with this new one they were building together. The kitchen was filled with laughter by the time he arrived, Emma perched on a stool while Victoria attempted to locate the mixing bowls and cabinets she'd probably never opened before. "Here, let me." Ethan moved into the space, and Victoria stepped back with visible relief. "I can negotiate billion-dollar contracts, but apparently basic breakfast preparation is beyond my skill set." "Good thing you married someone with practical skills then." "Extremely good thing." The look she gave him was warm and unguarded, and Ethan had to resist the urge to kiss her in front of Emma, who was watching them both with the knowing expression of a child who understood more than adults usually credited. They made pancakes together, the three of them navigating the kitchen with increasing coordination. Emma provided running commentary on proper technique, while Victoria proved surprisingly adept at flipping once Ethan showed her the wrist motion. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely perfect. The call from Gerald came while they were cleaning up, and Victoria put him on speaker after confirming Emma was occupied with cartoons in the other room. "I have news," Gerald said without preamble. "Julian's legal team requested a meeting. They want to discuss settlement terms." Victoria's expression went very still. "Settlement?" They're offering to drop the fraud challenge in exchange for you agreeing to certain conditions regarding company management and profit distribution. Absolutely not. He doesn't get to extort concessions just because he filed frivolous lawsuits. That's what I told them. Gerald's voice held a hint of satisfaction. But there's more. Apparently Julian's investigators found something. They won't say what, but they're claiming it's evidence that could fundamentally undermine your position. Ethan felt ice form in his stomach. What kind of evidence? They won't specify, but they want to meet you, Victoria, Julian, and respective legal counsel tomorrow at 2 p.m. After the call ended, Victoria paced the kitchen with controlled fury. He's bluffing. He has to be. What if he's not? Ethan asked quietly. What if they found the original contract or someone willing to testify about the arrangement? Then we deal with it. But Victoria's voice was tight with fear. We knew this was a possibility. We prepared for it. Did we? Because it feels like we've been so focused on making this real that we forgot to protect against the evidence of when it wasn't. Victoria stopped pacing, turning to face him fully. Are you saying you regret this? That we should have maintained more distance? No. I'm saying we need to be prepared for whatever Julian found. Because if it's bad enough, it could destroy everything. Not just your company, but what we've built together. The truth of it settled over them both, cold and unavoidable. They'd been so busy falling in love that they'd forgotten they were still vulnerable to the very evidence they'd created when this was just a transaction. That night, after Emma was in bed, they went through every document, every email, every piece of evidence that could potentially be used against them. The original contract was protected by attorney-client privilege, but there were other things. Financial transfers that showed suspicious timing, emails from the early days when their communication had been purely professional, building records that could establish they'd maintained separate bedrooms initially. None of this proves fraud, Victoria said, but she didn't sound convinced. No, but it supports Julian's narrative, that we entered into a business arrangement and fabricated emotional connection later. Except the emotional connection is real now. Doesn't that count for something? Ethan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I don't know. Maybe we're about to find out. The meeting was held at a neutral law office in Midtown, all glass and chrome, and the kind of aggressive professionalism that made Ethan's teeth ache. Julian was already there when they arrived, his expression smug in a way that made Ethan want to hit him. Victoria, so glad you could make time. Julian's false pleasantness was grating. Let's skip the performance, Julian. What do you want? Patricia Rothman spread a series of documents across the conference table with the precision of someone dealing a winning hand. We have evidence that your marriage began as a contractual arrangement, testimony from your building staff about separate bedrooms, financial records showing debt payments that coincided suspiciously with your marriage, email correspondence between you and Mr. Cole that was entirely professional up until the week before your wedding. None of that proves fraud, Gerald interjected. It proves that their relationship developed quickly, which isn't illegal. It proves a pattern. Patricia slid another document forward. This is an affidavit from someone who claims to have direct knowledge of a contract between Victoria and Ethan Cole, outlining the terms of their marriage arrangement in exchange for financial compensation. Ethan's blood went cold. Who? The source is confidential, but they're willing to testify that this marriage was purely transactional from the beginning. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Ethan felt her hand tighten on his under the table. You're bluffing. If you had actual evidence of a contract, you'd have produced it already. We have something better than the contract itself. We have someone who read it, who can testify to its contents in detail. Julian leaned forward. So here's my offer. You agree to step down as CEO, I take over leadership of Hale Industries, and I'll drop the fraud charges. You keep your inheritance, you keep your sham marriage, and you walk away before this destroys your reputation entirely. No. Victoria's voice was absolute. No? Julian's smile was razor sharp. You're willing to risk everything, the company, your position, your husband's reputation, because you're too proud to admit defeat? I'm willing to risk everything because I'm not going to let you destroy what I've built based on the testimony of some confidential source who may or may not exist. Victoria stood slowly. So here's my counteroffer. Produce your witness. Let them testify under oath. And when they can't substantiate their claims because no such contract exists in any form you can legally access, I'll sue you for harassment, defamation, and abuse of the legal process. The contract exists. My witness saw it. Then produce them. Name them. Let's see how confident you are when they have to testify under penalty of perjury. Julian and Patricia exchanged glances, and Ethan saw the first crack in their confidence. We're protecting our source's identity. How convenient. Victoria gathered her things. When you're ready to have an honest conversation instead of making empty threats, call Gerald. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. She walked out without another word, and Ethan followed, his heart racing with adrenaline and fear and pride at watching his wife refuse to be intimidated. In the elevator, Victoria's composure cracked slightly. They don't have the contract. They can't have it. It's protected. But they have something. Someone who knows enough to be dangerous. Who? Gerald would never break privilege. Margaret's been with me for years and is fiercely loyal. The only other person who saw that contract was... Victoria stopped, her face going pale. Patterson's paralegal. The one who drafted the original documents. Would they talk? For the right price? Maybe. Victoria pulled out her phone, dialing Gerald. We need to find out who Julian paid off and what they actually know. The investigation took 3 days of intensive legal work, Gerald's team tracking down everyone who'd had access to the original contract documents. They found her Tuesday afternoon while Ethan was in a meeting and Victoria was reviewing quarterly reports. The paralegal's name was Jennifer Moss, and she'd left Patterson's firm 6 months ago under circumstances that Gerald described as financially motivated. She'd been approached by Julian's investigators, offered a substantial sum for information about Victoria's legal dealings, and had apparently described the contract in enough detail to be credible without having actually retained a copy. Can she testify? Victoria asked during the emergency conference call. She can testify to what she remembers seeing, but without the actual document, it's hearsay. Her word against ours. Gerald paused. The problem is, her description is accurate enough that a jury might believe her. So what do? We could settle. Agree to some of Julian's terms in exchange for him dropping the challenge. No. Victoria's voice was steel. I won't give him anything. This company is mine. I earned it, and I'm not going to lose it because my brother paid someone to violate confidentiality agreements. Then we go to trial, and we fight. After the call, Victoria sat in her office staring at nothing, and Ethan could see her running calculations, weighing risks, trying to find an angle that didn't involve losing everything. There has to be another way, she said quietly. Maybe there is. Ethan had been thinking about this since the meeting with Julian, turning an idea over in his mind that was either brilliant or completely insane. What if we tell the truth? We can't produce the contract without... I don't mean the contract. I mean the truth about us, about what this has become. He moved to sit beside her. Julian's entire case rests on the assumption that our marriage is fake, that we're still just performing a role, but what if we prove him wrong? How? We can't exactly demonstrate emotional connection in a courtroom. Can't we? Victoria, we've built a life together. We have routines and inside jokes, and a daughter who loves us both. We have friends who've watched us develop real affection for each other. We have months of documented evidence showing that whatever this started as, it's become something genuine. Victoria looked at him with dawning understanding. You want to put our relationship on trial. I want to show them that people can find real connection even in unconventional circumstances. That what started as convenience became choice. Ethan took her hand. We tell them everything. The arrangement, the contract's purpose, the fact that we were honest with each other from the beginning. And then we show them that honesty created something real. That's a huge risk. We'd be admitting to exactly what Julian's accusing us of. We'd be admitting to how it started, not what it became. Ethan squeezed her hand. Do you trust me? Yes, but I'm not sure I trust a legal system to understand the difference between a contract marriage and a real one that started unconventionally. Then we make them understand. The strategy session with Gerald lasted 4 hours. He was skeptical at first, arguing that admitting to a contractual beginning would undermine their entire defense. But as Ethan and Victoria outlined their plan, the witnesses they could call, the evidence of genuine relationship development, the timeline showing how their connection had evolved, he began to see the potential. "It's risky," Gerald said finally, "but it might work. If you can convince a jury that real feelings developed, that you chose each other beyond the contract's requirements, then Julian's fraud case falls apart." "So we do it." Victoria looked at Ethan. "We tell them everything and trust that the truth is enough." The trial began 3 weeks later in a courtroom that felt too small for the stakes involved. Julian sat with his legal team looking confident. Victoria sat beside Ethan, their hands clasped under the table, presenting a united front. Patricia's opening statement was brutal, painting Victoria as a cold manipulator who'd fabricated a marriage solely for financial gain. She outlined the suspicious timeline, the financial arrangements, Jennifer Moss's testimony about the contract. "This isn't a love story," Patricia told the jury. "It's a fraud perpetrated on a dead man's will, on this company's shareholders, and on the institution of marriage itself." When it was Gerald's turn, he stood slowly, his expression calm. "My colleague is right about one thing. This isn't a typical love story, but that doesn't make it fraud." He gestured to where Ethan and Victoria sat. These two people entered into an unusual arrangement to solve mutual problems. They were honest with each other about their motivations, their needs, and their expectations. What they didn't expect was that proximity and honesty would create genuine affection, that convenience would become choice, that a contract would evolve into commitment. He paused, letting the words settle. "You're going to hear testimony about how this relationship began. It won't be romantic or conventional, but you're also going to hear about what it became. And at the end of this trial, you'll have to decide which matters more, how something starts or what it becomes." The prosecution called Jennifer Moss first. She was nervous on the stand, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but her testimony was damaging. She described the contract in detail, the 1-year term, the financial arrangements, the clause about maintaining the appearance of marriage. "And in your professional opinion, did this document describe a legitimate marriage or a business transaction?" Patricia asked. "It read like a business contract, very specific terms, conditions, deliverables. There was nothing romantic about it." "Thank you. No further questions." Gerald stood for cross-examination, his approach gentle. "Ms. Moss, when you reviewed this contract, what was the date?" "About 9 months ago." "And you haven't seen it since?" "No." "So you can't testify to whether the terms were fulfilled, modified, or superseded by subsequent agreements?" "No, I suppose not." "And you can't testify to what happened between Mr. Cole and Mrs. Hale after that contract was signed?" "No." "Thank you. That's all." Patricia called building staff who testified about separate bedrooms in the early months. She called business associates who described Victoria as cold and unemotional, incapable of genuine romantic attachment. She built a case that Victoria was exactly what her father had believed, too controlled, too ambitious, too calculating to maintain a real relationship. Then it was Gerald's turn to present their defense, and he started with Margaret. Victoria's assistant took the stand with her usual composure, but there was warmth in her voice when she spoke about watching their relationship develop. "At first they were polite strangers," Margaret testified, "very professional, very careful with each other. But over time that changed. I'd see Mr. Cole bring Mrs. Hale coffee without being asked. I'd see her leave work early to attend Emma's school events. Small gestures that spoke to genuine consideration." "Can you give us a specific example?" Margaret smiled. "Mrs. Hale hates being late. She's militant about punctuality. But one day, Emma's school called. She'd fallen on the playground and wanted her father. Mrs. Hale canceled 3 meetings, drove to the school herself, and sat with Emma for 2 hours until Mr. Cole could get there. When I asked her about the missed meetings later, she just said that family came first." The testimony was powerful, painting a picture of Victoria that contradicted Patricia's cold manipulator narrative. Gerald followed with David Park, who described watching Ethan transform from an exhausted single father, barely holding it together, to someone who smiled easily and talked about his wife with genuine affection. "He's different now," David said. "Lighter, like he's not carrying the weight of the world alone anymore." Then Gerald called Mrs. Chen, who took the stand with the authority of someone who'd seen Ethan at his lowest and watched him rebuild. "That boy was drowning when I knew him." she said bluntly. Working himself to death, terrified he couldn't provide for his baby girl. But he never complained. He just kept going. She looked directly at the jury. When he told me about Victoria, I was worried. I thought maybe she was using him. But then I met her, and I saw how she looked at Emma, like that child mattered, like they both mattered. What convinced you their relationship was real? Mrs. Chen smiled. Victoria called me one night, said Emma had asked about her mother, and she didn't know what to say. She was scared of saying the wrong thing, of hurting Emma or disrespecting her mother's memory. We talked for an hour about how to honor the past while being present in the now. Her voice gentled. A woman who's just performing doesn't call for advice on how to love someone else's child better. By the time Gerald finished presenting witnesses, the jury had a completely different picture. Not of a cold transaction, but of two broken people finding healing in each other and choosing to build something real from an unconventional beginning. Then Gerald called Victoria to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her usual composure, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she was sworn in. Gerald started gently, walking her through her father's will, the pressure to marry, the decision to find a practical solution. Why Mr. Cole specifically? Because he was competent, decent, and desperately needed help that I could provide. It seemed like a fair exchange. Victoria's voice was steady. I wasn't looking for love. I'd convinced myself I didn't need it, didn't want the vulnerability it required. When did that change? Victoria's gaze found Ethan's across the courtroom. Gradually. He was kind to his daughter in ways that broke my heart. He worked hard without expecting recognition. He saw me as a person instead of just a position or a challenge to overcome. She paused. And one day I realized I was looking forward to coming home. Not to my penthouse or my success, but to him, to them both. Mrs. Hale, did you enter into your marriage with the intent to defraud your father's will? No. The will required marriage. I got married. That I also found genuine partnership in the process doesn't make it fraud. It makes it fortunate. Patricia's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to catch Victoria in contradictions, to prove that her feelings were fabricated for the trial. Isn't it convenient that you fell in love with your husband right around the time legal challenges began? I didn't fall in love because of legal challenges. I fell in love despite actively trying not to. Victoria's control finally cracked slightly, real emotion bleeding through. Do you know how terrifying it is to need someone when you've spent your entire life proving you don't need anyone? To let someone see you without armor? To trust that they won't use your vulnerability as a weapon? So you admit you were trying not to develop feelings? Of course I was. Feelings complicate contracts. They make you weak. They give other people power over you. Victoria's voice strengthened. But Ethan showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness. That letting someone in doesn't mean losing control. It means sharing the burden. And yes, I fought that revelation every step of the way until I finally admitted that fighting it was more exhausting than just accepting what we'd become. Which is a family, imperfect and unconventional, but real. Patricia tried several more lines of attack, but Victoria held firm. Her testimony a mix of brutal honesty about their beginning and fierce protection of what they'd built. Then Gerald called Ethan, and everything intensified. He testified about Sarah's death, about the crushing weight of debt and responsibility, about the impossible choice Victoria had offered him. He didn't hide from the transactional nature of their beginning. I married her because I was desperate, Ethan said clearly. Because my daughter deserved a future I couldn't provide alone. Because Victoria offered me a lifeline when I was drowning. So it was just about money? At first, partly, but also because she was honest about what she needed and what she could offer. There was a clarity to it that felt respectful instead of transactional. Ethan looked at Victoria. And then I got to know her, the woman behind the CEO. The person who helped my daughter build block castles and asked for advice about honoring my late wife's memory. The partner who made me feel less alone for the first time in years. When did you realize you loved her? Ethan thought back to all the small moments that had accumulated into certainty. There wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small choices she made. Coming home early when Emma was sick. Learning to make terrible pancakes because it mattered to my daughter. calling Mrs. Chen to ask about parenting advice, even though she could have hired experts. He paused. She chose us over and over again when she didn't have to. And somewhere in all those choices, I realized I was choosing her back. Patricia's cross-examination tried to paint him as an opportunist, a desperate man willing to say anything to protect his financial arrangement. Isn't it true that if this marriage is declared fraudulent, you lose everything? The trust fund, the debt relief, your position at the company? Yes. So you have significant motivation to lie about your feelings. I have significant motivation to tell the truth because my daughter is watching this trial. She's going to read transcripts when she's older, and I want her to see that I chose honesty even when lying would have been easier. Ethan met Patricia's gaze steadily. I love Victoria, not because of what she can give me, but because of who she is. And whether you believe that or not doesn't change the truth of it. The final witness was Emma, which Gerald had argued against, but Victoria had insisted upon. She was 7 now, old enough to testify, but young enough that her honesty was unfiltered and potentially devastating. The judge allowed it with strict conditions, and Emma took the stand wearing her best dress and her plastic crown, looking both terrified and determined. Gerald kept his questions simple. Emma, do you know why we're all here today? To decide if Victoria really loves us or if she was just pretending. The bluntness of it sent ripples through the courtroom. And what do you think? I think she loves us. She helps me with my homework even when it's boring. She comes to my school plays. She knows I like pancakes with chocolate chips and that I'm scared of thunderstorms. Emma looked at Victoria with absolute trust. And she talks about my mommy like she was important, which she was. Does it bother you that your dad and Victoria got married quickly? Grown-ups do weird things all the time, but they're nice to each other, and they're nice to me, and we're happy. Emma's expression was fierce. Why does it matter how it started if we're happy now? Patricia declined to cross-examine. Apparently even she wasn't willing to aggressively question a 7-year-old, and Emma was dismissed. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following day, but that night Gerald called with unexpected news. Julian wants to settle. Victoria's expression hardened. Absolutely not. Hear me out. He's dropping all fraud allegations. He's agreeing that the marriage is legitimate. All he wants is a guarantee that he maintains his board seat and isn't removed from company leadership entirely. Why the sudden reversal? Because Emma's testimony destroyed his case. The jury was crying, Victoria. There's no way they're going to rule that your marriage is fraudulent after watching your daughter defend it with that kind of conviction. Victoria looked at Ethan, who nodded slowly. It's your call. But if we can end this without more trial, maybe we should. He doesn't deserve... No, he doesn't. But Emma deserves to not have her family dissected in a courtroom anymore. And maybe proving we won is enough. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, weighing pride against peace. Finally, she sighed. Fine. He keeps his board seat, but I want a signed agreement that he'll never challenge my position or this marriage again. And he makes a public statement supporting our relationship. Gerald negotiated the terms, and by the following morning, it was done. Julian released a statement acknowledging that while he'd had concerns about the marriage's timing, he now recognized it as legitimate and apologized for the distress his legal challenge had caused. The board voted unanimously to affirm Victoria's position as CEO. And just like that, the fight was over. They celebrated that night with takeout Chinese food on the penthouse floor, Emma between them, all 3 of them giddy with relief. We won, Emma announced, waving a spring roll. We beat the bad guy. Uncle Julian isn't exactly a bad guy, Victoria said, though her heart clearly wasn't in the correction. He tried to take you away. That's pretty bad. Ethan caught Victoria's eye over Emma's head, and they shared a smile that held months of fear and fighting and choosing each other despite every reason not to. Later, after Emma was asleep, they stood on the balcony overlooking the city that had witnessed their transformation. I can't believe it's actually over, Victoria said quietly. The legal challenge is over. Everything else is just beginning. Everything else? Ethan turned to face her fully. The contract expires in 3 weeks. We need to decide what happens after that. I thought we already decided that this was real. It is real. But the contract had an endpoint, a built-in escape clause if either of us wanted out. He took her hands. I don't want an escape clause anymore. I want permanent. I want to tear up the contract and write our own promises about what this marriage means. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What kind of promises? The kind that aren't about inheritance or financial security. The kind where we choose each other every day because we want to, not because we have to. Ethan pulled her close. I want to renew our vows, Victoria, real ones this time. In front of people who matter, saying words we actually mean. That's terribly romantic for someone who married me out of desperation. I'm learning. You're a good teacher. She laughed, the sound slightly watery. Yes, to all of it. Let's tear up the contract and write something real. They renewed their vows 6 months later in a small ceremony at the penthouse, Emma serving as both flower girl and ring bearer with the utmost seriousness. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire thing. Margaret actually smiled. David made a toast about sometimes the best relationships starting from the worst pickup lines, which made everyone laugh even though it wasn't entirely accurate. And when Ethan and Victoria exchanged new rings, ones they'd chosen together instead of ones purchased for performance, the promises they made were achingly simple and completely true. I choose you, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Not because a contract requires it or because it solves a problem, but because you make me braver and softer and more myself than I've ever been. I choose you, Ethan echoed. Not because you saved me, though you did, but because you saw me when I was invisible. Because you loved my daughter like she was yours. Because you taught me that vulnerability is strength and that letting someone in doesn't mean losing yourself. The officiant pronounced them married, again, and when they kissed, it felt like both an ending and a beginning. Emma cheered loudly enough that the neighbors probably heard. 2 years later, Victoria stood in the Hale Industries boardroom presenting quarterly results that showed record growth. Julian sat 4 seats down, no longer a threat, just a board member who occasionally offered decent suggestions and had grudgingly accepted that his sister's unconventional marriage had somehow become the most stable part of her life. At home, Ethan had just been promoted to VP of Strategic Operations, a position he genuinely earned through 3 years of excellent work. Emma was thriving in 3rd grade. Her drama club performances attended religiously by both her parents, who sat in the front row holding hands and crying at all the wrong moments. The penthouse had been redecorated with Emma's input, losing some of its museum quality in favor of actual comfort. There were photos on the walls now, Emma's school pictures, snapshots from family vacations, a framed image from their vow renewal that captured all 3 of them laughing at something long forgotten but clearly joyful. One evening, Victoria came home to find Ethan teaching Emma how to make his mother's recipe for cookies, both of them covered in flour and arguing good-naturedly about proper chocolate chip distribution. How was the board meeting? Ethan asked, looking up with a smile that still made her heart skip. Productive. Julian actually supported my proposal for international expansion. Character growth. It's beautiful to see. Emma abandoned the cookies to hug Victoria around the waist. We're making dessert. Daddy says I'm a natural baker, but I think he's biased. Completely biased, Victoria agreed, hugging her back. But probably also correct. Later, after Emma was asleep and the kitchen was clean, Ethan found Victoria on the balcony wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. You okay? He asked, settling beside her. I was just thinking about how 3 years ago, I stood here trying to figure out how to solve an impossible problem, and the solution I came up with was you. Best problem solving you ever did. Definitely top 5. She leaned into him, and he wrapped them both in the blanket. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of the contract, knowing exactly what was expected. Not even a little bit. Contracts are simple, but they're also limiting. He gestured at the penthouse behind them, at the life they'd built. This is complicated and messy and sometimes terrifying, but it's also real. And I'll take real over simple every time. Victoria tilted her face up to kiss him, soft and lingering. I love you. I don't think I say that enough. You say it every time you leave work early for Emma's recitals. Every time you make terrible pancakes on Saturday mornings. Every time you choose us over convenience. Still, the words matter too. She pulled back to meet his eyes. I love you, Ethan Cole. Completely. permanently, without contracts or conditions. I love you too, Victoria Cole, or Victoria Hale, or whatever combination of names you prefer as long as you keep coming home to us. They stood together on the balcony overlooking a city that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to partners to family, and the contract that had brought them together gathered dust in a drawer somewhere, superseded by something far more binding than legal language. The contract had given them a year. Love was giving them forever. And neither of them had any intention of wasting a moment of it. Inside, Emma dreamed of castles and dragons, and families that chose each other, while her parents stood in the cold November night choosing each other one more time, the way they would every day for the rest of their lives. The deal he never expected had become the life he'd always needed, and Victoria Hale, who'd entered into a transaction to save her company, had ended up saving herself instead, not through control or strategy or perfect planning, but through the messy, imperfect act of letting two people love her exactly as she was. The marriage built on lies had become the truest thing in both their lives, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be.